In this video, we're going to be breaking down 4 horrific family massacres in modern history. Let's get started with the first case. The East Lansdowne Family Massacre, a tragic day that shook Pennsylvania. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon in February 2024, the small community of East Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, became the scene of one of the most devastating family massacres in the state's modern history. What began as a family argument would end in unthinkable tragedy, claiming the lives of 5 innocent family members and leaving a community forever changed. The Le family, a picture of the American dream. The Le family represented everything hopeful about the immigrant experience in America. Chin Le and her husband Huang had arrived in the United States in 1981, seeking the promise of a better life. For more than 40 years, they had built their lives in the Delaware County area, watching their family grow and their children pursue their own versions of the American dream. At the heart of this story were Xuang Le, 40, and his wife Brittany McLaughlin Le, 37. Their love story was one that had captured the hearts of everyone who knew them. They had been happily married for 17 years, a testament to their deep love and commitment to each other. Brittany's father, John McLaughlin, would later describe their relationship in the most touching terms. After I met him and they got married, there became a point in my life where I said, I can die today because I know he got them. And they lived a full, wonderful life. Xuang was more than just a devoted husband. He was a passionate Philadelphia Eagles fan, the kind who lived and breathed every play of every game. His dedication to his team was legendary among his friends and family. Little did anyone know that when his headstone would be dedicated months after his death, it would happen on the same day his beloved Eagles were playing, as if the universe itself was acknowledging his unwavering loyalty. Brittany was described by her family as a loving and devoted mother, wife, and friend. She had a special gift for bringing people together, creating moments of joy even in the smallest gatherings. Her family would later remember her secret cocktail recipe, a special blend of juice and liquor that became part of family tradition. This seemingly small detail would become incredibly meaningful after her death, as family members would toast her memory with her own creation. Together, Xuang and Brittany had created something beautiful. 3 remarkable children who were the light of their lives. Natalia Le, 17, was on the cusp of adulthood, full of promise and potential. She was described as excelling in academics, arts, and sports. At 17, she represented the hopes and dreams of her parents, a young woman who seemed destined for great things. Nikayla Le, 13, was a talented dancer at Kathy Collins' dance studio in Aldan. Her dance instructors and fellow students described her as an amazing girl, a talented dancer, and an incredible friend. She had that special combination of skill and personality that made her beloved by everyone who knew her. Her dance studio would later post a heartbreaking tribute. Nikayla was an amazing girl, talented dancer, and an incredible friend. She will be missed. The youngest, Xavier Le, was just 10 years old. He was at that wonderful age where everything seemed possible, where dreams were big and life was an adventure waiting to unfold. Like his sisters, Xavier excelled in academics and activities, showing the same drive and passion that characterized his entire family. The McLaughlin family, Brittany's side of the family, would later issue a statement that perfectly captured who these 5 people were. Brittany and Xuang were a happily married couple for 17 years, loving and devoted parents to their 3 children, their extended family, and their beloved friends. Their 3 children all excelled in academics, the arts, and sports. The extended family dynamic. The Le family's living situation reflected both the values of their Vietnamese heritage and the practical realities of immigrant families supporting each other. The home at 58 Lewis Avenue in East Lansdowne housed not just Xuang's nuclear family, but also his parents, Chin and Huang Le, and his older brother, 3-year-old Can Le. This multi-generational living arrangement was not uncommon in immigrant families, representing both economic practicality and cultural tradition. It allowed the elderly parents to be cared for while also providing support for the younger generations. It was meant to be a source of strength and mutual aid. However, by early 2024, there were signs that Can Le was struggling. According to family members, he was recently divorced and out of work. These personal setbacks had left him in a difficult emotional and financial state. Despite these challenges, his mother, Chin Le, would later emphasize that the family had no history of serious arguments or conflicts. They had lived together peacefully for years, making what was about to happen all the more shocking and inexplicable. Can Le's background revealed some troubling signs, though nothing that would have predicted the coming tragedy. Court records showed that in 2006, he had been arrested in Delaware County and charged with making terroristic threats, trespassing, and disorderly conduct. While the first charge was dropped, he was placed in a diversion program for the other charges, eventually serving 32 hours of community service and paying $1,400 in fines during a year of probation. However, this incident from nearly 2 decades earlier seemed like a distant memory. His mother insisted that he had no known history of mental illness, and there had been no recent signs of violent tendencies or serious mental health issues that would have warned anyone of what was coming. The 7th of February 2024, the day everything changed. Wednesday, the 7th of February 2024, started like any other day in the Lay household. The children were likely preparing for school, the adults going about their daily routines. There was no indication that this would be anything other than an ordinary day in the life of an ordinary American family. But as the afternoon wore on, something went terribly wrong. According to investigators and testimony from surviving family members, an argument erupted between Can Lay and his 3-year-old niece, Nikayla. The exact nature of this argument remains unclear, and investigators would later say that the specific trigger may never be fully understood. What started as a typical family disagreement was about to escalate in the most unthinkable way. Chin Lay, Can's mother and Nikayla's grandmother, witnessed the beginning of what would become a nightmare. She heard her son argue with Nikayla and then heard something that chilled her to the bone, Can saying he was going to get a gun. This moment represents the critical point where everything changed. In most families, an uncle arguing with his teenage niece would be resolved with stern words, perhaps some time out, maybe involving the parents to mediate. But Can Lay's response was to escalate to deadly violence. Chin Lay and her husband, recognizing the immediate danger, made the desperate decision to leave the house. They understood instinctively that their son was about to do something terrible, and they needed to get to safety and call for help. As they fled their own home, they could hear the first gunshots ring out behind them. The elderly couple's quick thinking in that moment probably saved their own lives. Had they stayed in the house, attempting to reason with their son or protect their grandchildren, they almost certainly would have become victims themselves. It was Huang Le, Chin's husband and Can's father, who made the 911 call that would bring police racing to Lewis Avenue. The call came in at approximately 3:47 p.m., reporting that an 1-year-old girl had been shot. However, investigators would later note that some details of the initial call were unclear or possibly incorrect, adding to the confusion of the early response. The massacre unfolds. What happened inside 58 Lewis Avenue in the minutes after Chin and Huang Lei escaped would haunt investigators, first responders, and the community for years to come. Based on the physical evidence and the timeline reconstructed by authorities, Can Lay systematically murdered 5 members of his own family. The victims were found throughout the house, suggesting that the killings occurred in different locations and possibly over a span of several minutes. The medical examiner would later determine that Shuang Lei, Brittany McLaughlin Lei, Natalia Lei, and Nikayla Lei all died from gunshot wounds. Each shot represented not just a life ended, but a dream destroyed, a future stolen. 10-year-old Xavier Leigh's death was perhaps the most heartbreaking detail of all. The medical examiner determined that while the other family members died from gunfire, Xavier died from smoke inhalation. This suggests that he may have initially survived the shooting but was trapped in the house when the fire began. The thought of this young boy, scared and alone, succumbing to smoke while his family lay dead around him, adds an additional layer of horror to an already unthinkable crime. The weapon used in the killings was a Diamondback DB-15 pistol with a long barrel, a semi-automatic weapon that Can Lay had apparently acquired without his family's knowledge. The fact that he had access to such a deadly weapon, despite his previous legal troubles, raises questions about gun safety and background check systems that continue to be debated. The police response: heroism under fire. As the massacre was taking place inside the house, East Lansdowne Police Officer John Meehan, 44, and Lansdowne Police Officer David Chiazza, 54, were racing to the scene. Both were veteran officers with more than 2 decades of experience with their respective departments. They had responded to countless domestic disturbance calls over their careers, but nothing could have prepared them for what awaited them at 58 Lewis Avenue. When the officers arrived, they were immediately met with gunfire. Can Lay, having completed his systematic murder of his family members, had moved to the 3rd floor of the house and was firing down at the responding officers. This was not a case of police walking into an unknown situation. This was a deliberate ambush by a man who had nothing left to lose. The officer's response was, in the words of Delaware County District Attorney Jack Stolzheimer, absolutely heroic and textbook. Despite being outgunned and caught in a deadly ambush, they maintained their composure and followed their training. Officer Chiazza was shot once in the leg, while Officer Meehan also sustained gunshot injuries. Video from the scene, captured by news helicopters and body cameras, showed the chaotic moments as the wounded officers were dragged to safety by their colleagues. Upper Darby police quickly responded with ballistic shields, providing cover as the injured officers were evacuated from the line of fire. The image of these wounded officers being pulled to safety while gunfire continued from the house became one of the defining visuals of the tragedy. It showed both the vulnerability of the officers who risked their lives to protect others and the dedication of their colleagues who refused to leave them behind. Both Officer Meehan and Officer Shiatsa would survive their injuries and eventually make full recoveries. They were treated at Penn Presbyterian Medical Center and released within days of the shooting. However, the psychological trauma of that afternoon would likely stay with them forever. Delaware County District Attorney Stolzheimer would later praise the officers' response. The police response was absolutely heroic. In fact, it was textbook. Some of the things that happened that day from our law enforcement officers should be taught in our police academy. The fire, a final act of destruction. Approximately 15 minutes after the first officers arrived on the scene, those watching the drama unfold noticed something new and terrifying: smoke beginning to pour from the house. Canla had decided to add one final element to his horrific plan. Investigators believe that Canla intentionally set the house on fire, though they were never able to determine exactly how the fire was started or what, if any, accelerants were used. The flames spread quickly through the structure, turning what was already a crime scene into an inferno. The fire served multiple purposes from the perpetrator's perspective. It destroyed evidence, made rescue attempts impossible, and ensured that any family members who might have survived the initial shooting would not survive long enough to be rescued. For Xavier Lay, who had apparently survived the shooting only to die from smoke inhalation, the fire represented the final, cruel act in his uncle's plan. The flames also prevented first responders from entering the house to attempt rescues or to stop Ken Lay from continuing his attack. Police and firefighters could only watch as the house was consumed, knowing that people might still be alive inside but unable to reach them due to the ongoing gunfire and spreading flames. The fire burned for hours, sending massive black smoke plumes into the sky that could be seen for miles. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of the destruction to viewers across the region. At one point, an armored vehicle was used to ram the house in an attempt to create access for first responders, but by then the structure was too damaged and the fire too advanced. Local resident Derek Richardson captured cell phone video of the chaotic scene, showing officers helping wounded colleagues while under fire. His footage, along with news coverage, provided a real-time documentation of the tragedy as it unfolded. "I heard a lot of gunshots, and I just saw cops running from everywhere," one neighbor told WPVI, describing the confusion and terror of those first minutes. The sound of gunfire in their quiet residential neighborhood was something none of them had ever experienced or expected to experience. The final moments. Inside the burning house, Canlay made his final decision. Having murdered 5 members of his own family, shot 2 police officers, and set his home on fire, he turned the gun on himself. His remains were later found near the weapon used in the killings, ending any hope of understanding his motivations through direct questioning. The self-inflicted gunshot wound that ended Canlay's life also ended any possibility of justice in the traditional sense. There would be no trial, no opportunity for the surviving family members to confront him, no chance for him to explain his actions or express remorse. He had taken not only 5 innocent lives, but also any chance of understanding why he had done it. This aspect of the case would prove to be one of the most frustrating for investigators, family members, and the community. In most criminal cases, even the most heinous ones, there is eventually some explanation, some motive that can be understood, even if it can't be excused. But Canlay's suicide meant that the why of the 7th of February 2024 would remain forever unknown. Delaware County District Attorney Jack Stolzheimer would later express this frustration. "Nobody has come forward and provided any information that would explain what happened that day. I wish I had an answer for you. I know everyone wants to know why. I don't think we ever will. I think Canlay took the why to his grave." The aftermath, recovery and investigation. By the time the fire was finally extinguished and the scene was safe for investigators, 58 Lewis Avenue was nothing more than a charred shell. The home that had housed 3 generations of the Lay family, that had been filled with laughter and love and the sounds of children growing up, was reduced to blackened rubble. The recovery of the victims' remains would prove to be a difficult and emotionally challenging process. The intense heat of the fire had severely damaged the structure and the bodies inside. Delaware County authorities worked carefully to recover all 6 sets of remains, using dental records and DNA analysis to make positive identifications. The first 3 bodies, including that of a child, were recovered on Thursday, February 8. It wasn't until Friday, February 9, that all 6 sets of remains had been found and removed from the wreckage. District Attorney Stolzheimer announced at that point, "We think we have found everybody who was in that house, the Lay family. We have recovered all members of that family." The medical examiner's work was crucial in understanding exactly what had happened during those terrible minutes on February 7. The autopsies revealed that 5 of the 6 victims had died from gunshot wounds, while Xavier Lay died from smoke inhalation. This information helped investigators piece together the timeline and sequence of events. A partially melted rifle was recovered from the debris, confirming that Can Lay had indeed been the shooter. The weapon's condition made detailed forensic analysis challenging, but it provided enough evidence to confirm the basic facts of the case. The house itself was eventually demolished, the rubble cleared away to eliminate any remaining safety hazards. The empty lot that remained seemed inadequate to mark the site where such a profound tragedy had occurred. The community response, coming together in grief. The East Lansdowne community, like many small communities, was not prepared for a tragedy of this magnitude. The quiet residential neighborhood, where children rode bicycles and neighbors knew each other by name, had suddenly become the site of international news coverage. Mayor Majovi Bland spoke for many when she said, "We are still hurting, and this healing process will take a very, very long time." The mayor understood that this was not the type of event that a community simply moves past. It was something that would change the character of the place forever. In the immediate aftermath, community members began creating memorials at the site of the tragedy. Flowers, toys, and candles bearing the family's names were placed near the rubble of 58 Lewis Avenue. These spontaneous memorials became gathering places for people to grieve, reflect, and try to make sense of the senseless. The William Penn School District, where the Lay children had attended elementary, middle, and high school, was particularly affected. School officials immediately made counseling services available to students and staff who knew the family. The loss of 3 students, particularly in such a violent manner, was something the district had never experienced. Nikayla's dance studio, Kathy Collins' dance studio in Aldan, posted a touching tribute on social media. Nikayla was an amazing girl, talented dancer, and an incredible friend. She will be missed. For her fellow dancers, losing Nikayla meant losing a friend, a competitor, and a source of inspiration. On Saturday, February 10, just 3 days after the tragedy, the community came together for a vigil at Eden Community Park. Pink and blue balloons were released into the sky as hundreds of people gathered to remember the Lay family. The choice of colors, pink for the girls and blue for the boys, was a simple but touching way to honor each victim individually. John McLaughlin, Brittany's father, spoke at the vigil, sharing memories of his daughter and her family. His words captured both the depth of his loss and the strength of the love that had defined the family. "After I met him and they got married, there became a point in my life where I said, I can die today because I know he got them, and they lived a full, wonderful life." Brittany's sister added, "This is an unimaginable loss that no one can fathom or expect to prepare for, but we can see how much they were loved by the community." Perhaps most poignantly, Brittany's brother, Justin McLaughlin, spoke about the family's final moments. "As hard as it is, we are grateful that none had to survive the other and live through such a horrific event, and know that they all died the same way they lived, which was together." The investigation, searching for answers that don't exist. Law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to piece together not just what had happened on February 7, but why it had happened. The investigation involved multiple agencies, including the Pennsylvania State Police, local police departments, the Delaware County District Attorney's Office, and federal authorities. Investigators interviewed family members, friends, co-workers, and neighbors, looking for any sign that Can Lay had been planning violence or that there had been escalating tensions within the family. What they found was the opposite, a family that, by all accounts, had been living peacefully together with no history of serious conflicts. Chin Lay, Can's mother, and one of only 2 survivors from the house, repeatedly emphasized that her family had no history of violence or serious mental health issues. She described her son as recently divorced and unemployed, but said there had been no indication that he was capable of such violence. The investigation also looked into how Can Lay had acquired the weapon used in the killings. The Diamondback DB-15 pistol was a semi-automatic weapon that he had apparently obtained without his family's knowledge. Given his 2006 arrest and conviction for making terroristic threats, there were questions about whether he should have been able to legally purchase the firearm. Mental health experts were consulted to try to understand what could have driven a man with no apparent history of severe mental illness to suddenly commit such a horrific act. However, without the ability to examine or interview Canlay, and with no apparent warning signs, these experts could only speculate about possible psychological factors. The lack of a clear motive became one of the most frustrating aspects of the case for investigators, family members, and the community. In most cases of family violence, there are warning signs: a history of domestic abuse, financial pressures, mental health issues, substance abuse, or other factors that can help explain, if not excuse, the violence. But in the Lay family case, investigators found none of these typical warning signs. Delaware County District Attorney Stolzheimer summarized this frustration. There was no history of mental illness in the family or an indication of what could have caused the incident. This lack of apparent motive made the case particularly disturbing for many people following the story. If there were no warning signs, no obvious triggers, how could such a thing be prevented from happening to other families? The legal resolution: a case without trial. Because Canlay had died by suicide at the scene, there would be no traditional criminal prosecution. On the 28th of February 2024, District Attorney Stolzheimer announced that the investigation was being officially closed. With the perpetrator dead and clear evidence of his guilt, there was no one left to prosecute. If the torso recovered with the firearm is, in fact, the shooter, the criminal investigation will be closed because we will have found the person we believe at least killed one person in this home and probably killed all the others himself, Stolzheimer had said during the investigation. The formal closing of the case provided some measure of closure for the legal system, but it did little to satisfy the emotional and psychological needs of the surviving family members and the community. Without a trial, there would be no forum for the full story to be told, no opportunity for victim impact statements, and no formal recognition of the lives that had been lost. This aspect of the case highlighted one of the challenges of murder-suicide cases. While the legal system is designed to provide justice through prosecution and punishment, these cases often leave survivors feeling that justice has not been served because the perpetrator has escaped earthly consequences through suicide. The surviving family, carrying on after the unthinkable. Among the most affected by the tragedy were Chin and Huang Lei, the elderly parents who had lost both their son and their other son's entire family in one afternoon. These grandparents, who had come to America in 1981 seeking a better life for their family, had watched their American dream become an American nightmare. The psychological impact on these survivors cannot be overstated. They had witnessed their son threaten violence, had been forced to flee their own home to save their lives, and then had to watch as their home burned with their loved ones inside. They were simultaneously victims and the family members of the perpetrator. At the February vigil, Chin and Huang Lei attended but asked for privacy as they mourned. Their presence at the community gathering showed their need to grieve with others, but their request for privacy reflected the complex emotions they must have been experiencing. The McLaughlin family, Brittany's relatives, showed remarkable strength and grace in their public statements. Rather than expressing anger toward Canlay or the Lay family, they focused on celebrating the lives of their lost loved ones and supporting each other through their grief. Brittany's father's words at the vigil demonstrated this grace. His focus was not on the manner of his daughter's death, but on the fullness of her life. His ability to speak publicly about his love for Shuang and his gratitude for the happiness his daughter had found showed a level of forgiveness and strength that inspired many in the community. The extended families also had to deal with the practical matters that follow such a tragedy: funeral arrangements, financial concerns, legal issues related to the property, and the ongoing needs of the surviving elderly grandparents. The memorial, preserving memory and love. In October 2024, 8 months after the tragedy, the Lay family was honored with a permanent memorial. The Lee Memorial Company donated a headstone that was placed in Fernwood Cemetery, just a few blocks from the site of the tragedy on Lewis Avenue. The timing of the memorial dedication was particularly meaningful. Sunday, the 13th of October 2024, would have been Shuang Lei's 41st birthday. As fate would have it, the Philadelphia Eagles were playing that same day, a coincidence that seemed fitting for the man whose love of his team had been legendary among family and friends. The headstone itself was a work of art and love. Next to their names, a recent family photo of all 5 victims was etched into marble: Shuang and Brittany, with their 3 children, all dressed up and smiling. It was an image that captured them as they had lived, happy, together, and full of love for each other. At the memorial service, Justin McLaughlin raised a cup containing his sister's secret cocktail recipe, the special blend of juice and liquor that had become a family tradition. This simple gesture connected the mourners to Brittany's memory in a very personal way, transforming grief into celebration of a life fully lived. The memorial service was attended by both sides of the family, including Qin and Huang Lei and their surviving son, Fuang. Their presence showed the family's determination not to let the tragedy destroy all the bonds that had held them together. Mayor Majovi Bland's earlier words proved prophetic. The healing process was indeed taking a very long time, but the community was slowly finding ways to honor the victims while beginning to move forward. The broader impact: questions without answers. The East Lansdowne family massacre raised important questions about violence prevention, mental health, and public safety that extend far beyond the specific tragedy of the Le family. One area of concern was gun access and background check systems. Canlay's 2006 conviction for making terroristic threats raised questions about how he was able to acquire the semi-automatic weapon used in the killings. While the specific details of his firearm purchase were not made public, the case highlighted ongoing debates about background check systems and waiting periods for gun purchases. Mental health professionals also struggled to understand how someone with no apparent history of severe mental illness could suddenly commit such an act. This aspect of the case contributed to ongoing discussions about the unpredictability of some forms of violence and the limitations of current mental health screening and intervention systems. The case also raised questions about domestic violence and family violence prevention. While this was not a typical domestic violence case involving spousal abuse, it was an example of family violence that had no apparent warning signs. This made it particularly challenging for those working in violence prevention fields. For law enforcement, the case demonstrated both the heroism of individual officers and the challenges of responding to active shooter situations in residential settings. The quick response and professional conduct of officers Mihan and Shiatsa, as well as the supporting officers who helped rescue them, provided valuable lessons for police training programs. As time passes, it becomes increasingly important to remember Shuang, Brittany, Natalia, Nakayla, and Xavier Lei, not as victims of violence, but as people who lived full, meaningful lives surrounded by love. Shuang Le, the devoted Eagles fan and loving husband, who made his father-in-law feel secure in his daughter's happiness. Brittany McLaughlin Lei, the mother and wife who created special moments through simple gestures like her secret cocktail recipe, who brought joy and laughter to family gatherings. Natalia Lei, 17, the young woman on the verge of adulthood who excelled in academics, arts, and sports, who represented the hopes and dreams of her parents. Nakayla Lei, 13, the talented dancer who was described as amazing, talented, and an incredible friend by everyone who knew her. Xavier Lei, 10, the little boy who was just beginning to discover his own talents and interests, who should have had decades of life ahead of him. These 5 people lived lives filled with love, achievement, and potential. They were part of a family that represented the best of the American immigrant experience: hard work, education, success, and the creation of opportunities for the next generation. The tragedy of the 7th of February 2024 cannot be undone. The questions about why it happened may never be answered. But the love that defined the Lei family, the strength shown by their surviving relatives, and the support demonstrated by their community ensure that their legacy will be about more than the manner of their deaths. Conclusion: a tragedy that defies understanding. The East Lansdowne family massacre stands as one of the most shocking family violence cases in Pennsylvania's modern history. The systematic murder of 5 family members by their own relative, combined with the attack on police officers and the destruction of their home by fire, created a tragedy that captured national attention and left a community searching for answers. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not just the scale of the violence, but the apparent absence of warning signs or clear motive. In a time when we often look for explanations for such tragedies, mental illness, financial stress, substance abuse, history of domestic violence, the Lei family case offers none of these obvious factors. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of this tragedy, that sometimes evil acts are committed by people who show no obvious signs of being capable of such violence. It is a sobering reminder of the unpredictability of human behavior and the fragility of the safety we assume in our daily lives. But it is also a reminder of the power of community, love, and resilience in the face of unthinkable loss. The response of the McLaughlin and Lee families, the support shown by the East Lansdowne community, and the dedication of the first responders who risked their lives that day all demonstrate that even in our darkest moments, human goodness and love can prevail. The empty lot where 58 Lewis Avenue once stood will always be a reminder of what was lost on the 7th of February 2024. But the memorial at Fernwood Cemetery, with its image of a happy family frozen in marble, serves as a testament to how the Lay family actually lived, together, loving, and full of hope for the future. On the 7th of February 2024, the quiet community of East Lansdowne, Pennsylvania witnessed one of the most shocking family massacres in the state's modern history. Can Lay, 43, systematically murdered 5 members of his own family after an argument with his 13-year-old niece, Nikayla. The victims were his brother, Shuang Le, 40, sister-in-law Brittany McLaughlin Le, 37, and their 3 children, Natalia Le, 17, Nikayla Le, 13, and Xavier Le, 10. The tragedy unfolded when Can's elderly parents, Chin and Huang Lei, heard him threaten to get a gun during the family argument. They quickly fled the house and called 911. When police officers John Meehan and David Shiatza arrived at 58 Lewis Avenue, Can immediately opened fire from inside the house, wounding both officers. After killing his family members with a semi-automatic pistol, Can set the house on fire and committed suicide. The medical examiner determined that 4 family members died from gunshot wounds, while 10-year-old Xavier died from smoke inhalation, suggesting he initially survived the shooting but was trapped when the fire began. The heroic response of police officers, who rescued their wounded colleagues under fire, prevented additional casualties. What made this case particularly disturbing was the complete absence of warning signs. The Le family, Vietnamese immigrants who had lived peacefully together for years, showed no history of violence, serious mental illness, or family conflicts. Despite extensive investigation, authorities never determined a clear motive for Can's actions, with District Attorney Jack Stolzheimer stating that Can Le took the Y to his grave. The community's response demonstrated remarkable resilience, with memorial services, scholarship funds established in the children's names, and ongoing support for the surviving grandparents. The case highlighted the unpredictable nature of family violence and became a sobering reminder that sometimes tragedy strikes without warning, even in the most loving families. Moving on to the most horrific family murder in UK lockdown history. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. On the 29th of March 2020, just 1 week into Britain's first coronavirus lockdown, the bodies of Kelly Fitzgibbons, her 2 young daughters, Ava and Lexi, and their family dog were discovered in their West Sussex home. The man responsible was Robert Needham, Kelly's partner and the father of her children, who had used a shotgun to kill his entire family before turning the weapon on himself. This murder-suicide would become known as one of the most horrific family crimes committed during the pandemic, exposing serious flaws in Britain's gun licensing system and highlighting the deadly consequences when domestic violence escalates unchecked. The murders took place in Woodmancote, a quiet village in West Sussex, just a few miles east of Chichester. This was a close-knit community where violent crime was virtually unheard of. The village sits in rolling countryside, surrounded by fields and woodland, the kind of place where children could play safely and neighbors knew each other by name. House prices in the area reflected its desirability, with the family's home valued at around £600,000. It was exactly the sort of place young families moved to escape the pressures of city life and raise their children in safety and tranquility. The timing couldn't have been worse for the nation. Britain had just entered its first lockdown on the 23rd of March 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic gripped the world. People were confined to their homes, isolated from friends and family, grappling with unprecedented uncertainty about their health, jobs, and futures. The death toll was climbing daily, hospitals were overwhelmed, and the entire economy had ground to a halt almost overnight. In those early days of lockdown, no one knew how long the restrictions would last or what the ultimate cost would be. For families across the country, lockdown meant being trapped together 24 hours a day with no escape. Children couldn't go to school, adults couldn't go to work, and the normal social outlets that helped people cope with stress had disappeared overnight. Domestic violence charities were already warning about increased risks, as perpetrators and victims found themselves confined together with no respite. The isolation, financial stress, and uncertainty created perfect conditions for domestic tensions to escalate. Kelly Fitzgibbons was 40 years old, working part-time as a legal secretary. She was an identical twin, incredibly close to her sister Emma, who described their bond as inseparable. The twins had grown up together in what Emma described as an idyllic and happy childhood, spending hours playing together, making up dance routines and plays to show their family. They had remained best friends into adulthood, speaking to each other every single day without fail. Emma would later say, "We always said we couldn't live without each other, so her loss is still incomprehensible to me and our father." Kelly was described by everyone who knew her as wonderful and special. She was kind, caring, funny, and always smiling with an amazing love for life. She had many friends and was devoted to both her friends and family. Above all, Kelly had always longed for children. She had dreamed of being a mother for years, so when she finally became pregnant, she was absolutely thrilled. Being a mother became the center of her world, and she threw herself completely into that role with characteristic dedication and love. 4-year-old Ava was described by her Aunt Emma as beautiful and angelic. She was very much a daddy's girl, adoring Robert and following him around whenever he was home. Ava had started to develop her own personality, showing signs of creativity and intelligence that reminded everyone of her mother. She was the kind of child who lit up a room when she smiled, full of energy and curiosity about the world around her. At 4 years old, she was just beginning to understand the world around her, asking endless questions and soaking up everything her parents taught her. 2-year-old Lexi was described as cheeky, with the signature Fitzgibbons curly hair that marked her as unmistakably part of the family. Despite her young age, she already showed signs of having a strong personality, keeping her parents and sister entertained with her antics. Like many toddlers, she was fearless and adventurous, exploring everything within reach and keeping Kelly constantly on her toes. She had just reached the age where her personality was really starting to shine through, showing hints of the person she might have become. The family also included their beloved dog, Billy, a Staffordshire Bull Terrier who was completely devoted to the children. Billy was gentle and protective with Ava and Lexi, the kind of family pet that becomes an integral part of daily life. The dog had been with the family for years and was loved by everyone who met him. Billy represented the innocent, loving atmosphere that should have characterized this family home. Robert Needham, 42, worked as a builder and had been in the construction industry for years. He was skilled at his trade and took pride in his work, particularly when it came to the extension he was building on the family home. The project was ambitious, converting and extending the house to create more space for the growing family. Robert had been working on it for months, but progress had slowed significantly due to financial constraints and other pressures. On the surface, he appeared to be a devoted partner and father. The couple had been together for over 10 years, having met when Kelly was in her late 20s. They had built what seemed like a stable life together, eventually moving into his mother's house in Woodmancote. The arrangement worked well for everyone. Robert's mother had a self-contained granny flat downstairs, giving her independence while keeping the family close. The couple lived rent-free in the main part of the house, which should have helped their financial situation considerably. To everyone who knew them, they seemed like the perfect family. Robert appeared to adore his daughters, particularly Ava, who had clearly chosen him as her favorite parent. Friends and family members who visited the house often commented on how patient he seemed with the children, how he would play with them and help with bedtime routines. Even Kelly's twin sister Emma, who spoke to Kelly every single day and knew her better than anyone, believed their life was ideal. But Robert was a complex man, with hidden depths that few people understood. Those who knew him best described him as quiet and introverted, someone who rarely shared his feelings or opened up about personal struggles. His friend Sue would later recall that he never talked about himself and seemed to keep his emotions locked away. This emotional distance, which some might have seen as strength or stoicism, was actually masking serious underlying problems. What no one in Kelly's family knew was that Robert had a long-standing cocaine addiction that had been going on for years. This wasn't casual drug use. It was a serious addiction that had already caused visible physical damage. He had been forced to see a doctor about damage the drug had caused to his nose, a clear sign of chronic cocaine use. The addiction was expensive, adding to the family's financial pressures while also affecting Robert's mental state and decision-making abilities. Robert also had a documented history of mental health problems that stretched back decades. He had been treated for depression twice, once as a teenager in the 1990 seconds, and again in 2003. In 2013, he had visited his GP about work-related stress, indicating that his mental health struggles were ongoing. These episodes of depression, combined with his drug use, created a volatile combination that was invisible to most of the people around him. The facade of the perfect family was also cracking in ways that neighbors were beginning to notice. One neighbor described Robert as a bully who was rude and ignorant. They complained that he would let the dog out at all hours of the night, disturbing others, while simultaneously making noise complaints about neighbors engaging in normal activities. The neighbor said, "Kelly was all right, but he was a bully. He was rude. He let that dog out at all hours of the night. She was nice, but I kept away from him. He was ignorant and also made a lot of noise, but he would complain to my landlord about me exercising in the house at tea time." This behavior pattern, being controlling and aggressive while presenting as the victim, is common in domestic abuse situations. Robert seemed to feel entitled to make noise and disturb others while being hypersensitive to any perceived disruption from those around him. The neighbors' comment that they kept away from him suggests that Robert's intimidating behavior was noticeable to people outside the family. But beneath this perfect exterior, serious cracks were forming that would eventually tear the family apart. The couple had significant financial troubles that were causing increasing stress on their relationship. They owed a combined £30,000 in debt, which was a substantial burden for a family living on Kelly's part-time salary and Robert's variable building income. Robert had a £14,000 bank loan that was causing monthly strain on their budget, while Kelly had around £3,000 in credit card debt that she was struggling to pay down. Their financial situation was complicated by their property investments. The couple owned 2 buy-to-let properties, which should have been generating income to help with their debts. However, the rental income wasn't enough to cover all their expenses, particularly with Robert's building business facing challenges and the costs of the home extension project mounting. They had borrowed £20,000 from Robert's mother to help with their financial problems, adding family pressure to their money worries and creating a sense of obligation and shame about their inability to manage their finances independently. Robert had been building an extension on the family home, a project that had started with great enthusiasm but had become a source of stress as costs mounted and progress slowed. The extension was meant to create more space for the family and potentially add value to the property, but the work had stalled due to money problems. Building materials costs were rising, and Robert was having to do most of the work himself to save money, which meant progress was incredibly slow and the house was in a constant state of disruption. As March 2020 arrived, the pressure on the family intensified dramatically in ways that no one could have predicted. The coronavirus pandemic was spreading rapidly across the world, and Britain was preparing for lockdown. For Robert, who already struggled with mental health issues and had a history of drug abuse, the uncertainty and isolation would prove catastrophic. The mounting stress was about to push him over the edge in the most violent way possible. More troubling were the personal issues that Kelly kept hidden from everyone around her, including her beloved twin sister, Emma. Text messages recovered from her phone after the murders revealed a relationship under severe strain that no one in her family had suspected. The messages painted a picture of a woman living in fear and unhappiness, desperately trying to protect her children while dealing with a partner whose behavior was becoming increasingly difficult and frightening to manage. In January 2020, just 2 months before the murders, Kelly had texted Robert, "Can we be civil in front of the girls, please? I dread coming home." This single message revealed the extent of Kelly's unhappiness and fear. The fact that she dreaded coming home to her own house, the place where she should have felt safest, suggests that Robert's behavior had become intimidating and unpredictable. The reference to being civil in front of the girls indicates that there had been arguments or confrontations that were frightening the children, and that Kelly was desperately trying to protect them from witnessing their father's volatile behavior. By February, things had deteriorated even further. On the 5th of February 2020, Kelly sent another revealing message. "I think we should have a break and see how we both feel." Robert's response was cold and dismissive. "If that's how you really feel." These messages show that Kelly was actively considering ending the relationship, something that would have been extremely difficult for her as a mother of 2 young children who had invested over a decade in building a life with Robert. The fact that she was even suggesting a break indicates how desperate she had become. The text exchanges revealed in court showed a pattern of Kelly trying to manage Robert's moods and behavior while protecting her children from the worst of it. She was walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace while dealing with a partner who seemed increasingly volatile and unpredictable. The fact that she never shared any of this with her twin sister Emma, with whom she spoke every day, shows how isolated and ashamed she must have felt about her situation. On the 4th of March 2020, just 3 weeks before the murders, Robert and Kelly bought a second house together. On the surface, this seemed like a positive step. They planned to rent it out, just as they did with their first property. The couple restructured their buy-to-let mortgages so that their monthly payments for both properties would be less than what they had been paying for just one. The rental income from their first tenant would cover both mortgages completely. It seemed like a smart financial move that could help solve their money problems and give them a fresh start. But the property purchase also added pressure to an already strained relationship. Taking on additional debt and financial obligations when they were already struggling was risky. The decision may have been driven by desperation rather than sound financial planning, high attempt to solve their problems that might actually make things worse if anything went wrong. Then came the lockdown announcement that changed everything. Prime Minister Boris Johnson addressed the nation on the 23rd of March 2020, telling people they must stay at home except for essential trips. The message was clear. Normal life was suspended indefinitely. Suddenly, Kelly became worried that they wouldn't be able to find a tenant for their second property. The rental market was about to collapse as people lost their jobs and economic uncertainty gripped the country. What had seemed like a solution to their financial problems now looked like it might become an even bigger burden. The lockdown restrictions meant that Robert's building work would likely be suspended or severely limited. Construction sites were closing, and non-essential work was being halted across the country. This threatened his already variable income at the worst possible time. The couple was facing the prospect of being unable to meet their mortgage payments on 2 properties, while being trapped together in a house that had become a source of tension rather than comfort. At the same time, Robert was struggling to obtain cocaine from his usual suppliers. In the days leading up to the murders, he had tried at least twice to get drugs but was unsuccessful. The lockdown had disrupted drug supply chains, just as it had disrupted everything else. For someone with a long-term addiction, this would have added to his stress and instability, potentially triggering withdrawal symptoms and worsening his already fragile mental state. The combination of factors was creating a perfect storm. Financial pressure was mounting, the family was trapped together with no escape. Robert's drug supply was cut off, and Kelly was actively considering leaving him. For someone with his history of mental health problems and violent tendencies, these stressors were pushing him toward a breaking point. The final piece of the puzzle came on the 20th of March 2020, just 9 days before the murders and 3 days before lockdown began. Robert visited a registered firearms dealer and purchased a shotgun. He told the dealer he wanted to shoot pigeons, but this was a complete lie. The timing of this purchase, so close to lockdown and so soon after Kelly had suggested they take a break, was not coincidental. Robert was planning something, though whether he had murder in mind from the beginning or whether the plan developed later is impossible to know. What makes Robert's gun purchase even more disturbing is that he had actually applied for and received a shotgun license in 2016, despite lying extensively on his application form about his criminal history and mental health issues. The gun licensing system had failed catastrophically, allowing someone with a documented history of depression, drug addiction, and criminal behavior to legally purchase a weapon. When Robert first applied for the license, he had been living in Hampshire. He submitted his application to Hampshire police, claiming he had no criminal convictions and no history of mental health problems. This was completely false. During the application process, a firearms inquiry officer from Hampshire visited Robert at home and questioned him about these claims. Under pressure during the interview, Robert admitted he had received a police caution at age 25 for his involvement in bicycle theft. When asked why he hadn't disclosed this on the form, he said he didn't think it was relevant. He also admitted he had been treated for depression as a teenager in the 1,990 seconds and had visited his GP in 2013 for work-related stress. Again, when asked why he hadn't disclosed this medical history, Robert said the treatment was a long time ago and therefore he didn't think it was relevant. These were clear lies that should have disqualified him from receiving a firearms license. Robert moved to Sussex before his application was completed, so Sussex police took over the case. Despite knowing about his lies and his history of mental health problems and criminal behavior, they granted him the license in 2016. A letter from Robert's GP revealed he had actually been treated for depression twice, not just once as he had claimed. The FAO who interviewed Robert had recommended that he be sent a disclosure warning letter about failing to provide accurate information on future applications, but this letter was never sent because his case was transferred between police forces. Over the next 4 years, Robert renewed his shotgun license and even applied for an additional firearms license in 2017. Each time, the authorities missed opportunities to reassess his suitability to own a weapon. The system was clearly broken, prioritizing administrative efficiency over public safety. By 2020, police procedures had changed, and Chief Inspector Simon Starnes of Sussex and Surrey Police later testified that Robert's applications would not have been approved today under the stricter rules introduced after 2020. But in March 2020, Robert still had his license, and it was completely legal for him to purchase additional weapons. When he walked into that gun shop on March 20, claiming he wanted to shoot pigeons, he was legally entitled to buy a shotgun. The weapon he chose was a semi-automatic shotgun capable of firing 6 shots, hardly necessary for pest control, as Kelly's stepmother later pointed out. A gun that will fire 6 shots. Why do you need that to shoot rabbits? The choice of weapon was telling. Robert didn't buy a basic shotgun suitable for pest control. He chose a weapon capable of inflicting maximum damage in a short time. This suggests that he may have already been planning to use it against multiple targets, though we can never know for certain what was going through his mind at the time of purchase. As the first week of lockdown progressed, the pressure on the family reached breaking point. They were trapped in their home together, worried about money, unable to see friends or extended family for support. Robert was dealing with his drug addiction, his mental health issues, and the growing strain in his relationship with Kelly. The couple had been discussing a trial separation in February, and now they were forced to be together 24 hours a day with no escape. The isolation was particularly difficult for Kelly, who was used to speaking to her twin sister every day and maintaining close relationships with friends and colleagues. Suddenly, she was cut off from her support network, trapped with a partner whose behavior was becoming increasingly unpredictable. She couldn't take the children to school or play groups, couldn't meet friends for coffee or moral support, couldn't even visit her beloved twin sister. The lifelines that might have helped her cope with a deteriorating relationship had all been severed. For Robert, the isolation meant there was no respite from the financial and personal pressures that were overwhelming him. He couldn't escape to work, couldn't meet friends at the pub, couldn't engage in the normal activities that might have provided distraction from his problems. The extension project that had been his focus was now stalled, leaving him with too much time to brood about his failures and frustrations. The children, too, were affected by the lockdown in ways that added to family stress. 4-year-old Ava couldn't go to nursery or see her friends. 2-year-old Lexi was at an age where she needed constant attention and stimulation. Both girls were full of energy, with nowhere to expend it except within the confines of their home. For parents already under stress, managing 2 energetic young children 24 hours a day would have been exhausting. Before we continue with the horrifying details of what happened next, make sure to subscribe if you're following this breakdown of one of the UK's most shocking family murders. The week leading up to the murders was marked by an eerie sense of normalcy that made what followed even more shocking. Neighbors saw the family going about their daily routines within the constraints of lockdown. Robert continued to work on the house extension when weather permitted. Kelly managed the children and tried to maintain some semblance of routine. To outside observers, they looked like any other family adapting to the strange new reality of lockdown life. But inside the house, the pressure was building to an explosive level. Kelly's text messages from earlier in the year showed that she had already been planning to leave Robert, or at least take a break from their relationship. The lockdown had trapped her in a situation she was already desperate to escape. For someone considering leaving an abusive partner, being confined together with no outside support or escape routes would have been terrifying. Robert, meanwhile, was dealing with multiple stressors that were converging in the worst possible way. His cocaine addiction was unsatisfied due to supply disruptions. His mental health was deteriorating under the pressure of isolation and uncertainty. His relationship with Kelly was falling apart, threatening his sense of control and stability. His financial problems were getting worse rather than better, despite their attempts to solve them through property investment. The gun he had purchased was now in the house, a constant reminder of his power and a temptation when his anger and frustration reached their peak. Having access to a weapon dramatically changed the dynamic of any potential confrontation. What might have been a heated argument or even a physical altercation was now capable of becoming something far more deadly. Saturday, the 28th of March 2020, began like many other evenings during the early days of lockdown. Families across the country were trying to create some sense of normalcy while confined to their homes, and the Needham family was no exception. They decided to treat themselves to a Chinese takeaway to be delivered to their home in Woodmancote. It was the first Saturday night of the lockdown, and parents everywhere were trying to make the best of a difficult situation for their children's sake. The evening seemed completely normal to anyone watching from the outside. The food arrived as expected, and the family sat down to eat together. 4-year-old Ava and 2-year-old Lexi were in good spirits, happy to have their favorite takeaway food and excited about staying up a little later than usual. Kelly seemed to be managing well, keeping the children entertained and trying to maintain the family routines that were so important for young children's sense of security. After dinner, Robert participated in what would become his final family video call. Using FaceTime, he connected with relatives, presenting the image of a normal, loving family adapting to lockdown life. The technology that was keeping families connected during isolation became a window into what appeared to be domestic normalcy. Robert appeared calm and engaged, playing with the children and participating in conversation. There was absolutely nothing in his behavior during the call to suggest what was about to happen. To everyone watching, he appeared to be his usual quiet self, perhaps a bit tired from the stress of lockdown, but otherwise normal. The children were put to bed as usual after the video call ended. 4-year-old Ava and 2-year-old Lexi went upstairs to their bedroom, following the bedtime routine that Kelly had worked so hard to maintain, despite the disruption of lockdown. Kelly would have read them stories, helped them brush their teeth, and tucked them into their bed. The girls settled down for the night, probably talking quietly to each other as siblings do, completely unaware that these would be their final hours. What happened next remains partially shrouded in mystery, as the only person who could have explained Robert's mindset died by his own hand. The timeline can only be reconstructed from physical evidence and the positions of the bodies when they were found. But the evidence tells a horrifying story of calculated violence that destroyed an entire family in a matter of minutes. Sometime after the children were asleep, Robert retrieved the shotgun he had purchased just 9 days earlier. The weapon had a 3-foot barrel and was capable of firing multiple rounds in rapid succession. It was far more powerful than anything needed for the pest control he had claimed to want it for. This was a weapon designed for maximum lethality, and Robert was about to use it for its intended purpose. Robert made his way upstairs to where his daughters were sleeping peacefully in their shared bedroom. Ava and Lexi were found lying side by side under the duvet, suggesting they were fast asleep when they were killed. The scene that would later greet the person who discovered them was so traumatic that it would haunt everyone involved in the investigation for years to come. The innocence of the children, tucked safely in their bed, made the violence that followed even more shocking. Robert shot both children as they lay sleeping. 4-year-old Ava, described by her aunt as beautiful and angelic, and 2-year-old Lexi, with her distinctive curly hair and cheeky personality, never had a chance to understand what was happening. They likely never even woke up. The children died instantly from gunshot wounds, their young lives ended by the man they trusted most in the world, their own father, who had tucked them into bed countless times before and who they expected to protect them from any danger. The killing of his own children represents the most incomprehensible aspect of Robert's actions. These were children who loved him unconditionally, who ran to greet him when he came home from work, who called him daddy and looked to him for comfort and security. Ava, in particular, was described as a daddy's girl who adored her father. The betrayal of that trust, the violation of the most fundamental bond between parent and child, makes these murders particularly horrifying. After killing his daughters, Robert turned his attention to Kelly. The exact sequence of events is unclear, but the physical evidence suggests that Kelly became aware of what was happening and tried to intervene. She was found face down on the floor next to the children's bed. The post-mortem examination revealed that she had died from shotgun injuries to her head and neck. Critically, medical examiners also found a shotgun wound on her arm that was described as defensive. Anyone. This defensive wound tells a crucial part of the story. It suggests that Kelly had time to realize what was happening and tried to protect herself. She may have heard the shots that killed her children and rushed to their bedroom, only to find Robert with the gun. In her final moments, she would have understood that her children were dead and that she was next. The terror she must have experienced is unimaginable. The defensive wound indicates that Kelly fought for her life in those final moments. She may have tried to grab the gun or shield herself from the blast. This was not a woman who simply accepted her fate. She struggled against her attacker, even though that attacker was someone she had loved and lived with for over a decade. Her instinct for survival kicked in, but it was no match for a man with a loaded shotgun at close range. Kelly's final moments must have been filled with the most intense fear and grief imaginable. She would have seen her children's bodies and known they were dead. She would have realized that the man she had been trying to leave had chosen to destroy their entire family rather than let her go. The combination of grief for her children and terror for her own life would have been overwhelming. Robert's violence extended even to the family dog, Billy, a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, who had been nothing but loyal and loving to the family. The dog was found dead near the bathroom with a gunshot wound. Even the family pet, which had done nothing but provide companionship and joy, was not spared from Robert's murderous rampage. This killing seems particularly senseless. The dog posed no threat and could not have testified against him. It suggests that Robert was in a state of complete rage, determined to destroy everything connected to the life he was about to leave behind. The killing of Billy also demonstrates the thoroughness of Robert's violence. He was not acting in a moment of passion that focused only on Kelly. This was a methodical destruction of his entire family, including the pet that the children had loved. It shows a level of calculation and planning that makes the murders even more chilling. Having destroyed his entire family, Robert finally turned the gun on himself. He was found in the hallway between the bedrooms and the stairs, still holding the shotgun with the barrel pointed at his head. The weapon was still positioned in his lap when his body was discovered the next day. The image of Robert in his final moments, surrounded by the bodies of his victims, having destroyed everything he claimed to love, represents the ultimate expression of domestic violence taken to its logical extreme. Analysis of Robert's blood and urine samples showed that while he had alcohol in his system, it was below the legal drink drive limit. There were no traces of cocaine in his blood, though hair analysis revealed he had used the drug within the 3 months before his death. This means that Robert was essentially sober when he committed these murders. He cannot claim that drugs or alcohol impaired his judgment or reduced his responsibility for his actions. The house where this horror unfolded was worth an estimated £600,000, located in one of the most peaceful parts of rural England. It was the kind of place where families moved to escape the chaos of city life and raise their children in safety. The irony that the greatest danger came from within the family itself was not lost on the local community or the investigators who had to process the scene. The murders took place in what should have been the safest space in the world for these victims, their own home. Ava and Lexi were killed in their bedroom, the place where they should have felt most secure. Kelly died trying to protect her children in their own house. The violation of domestic space, the corruption of what should have been a sanctuary, adds another layer of horror to these crimes. Immediate aftermath. The bodies were discovered the following day, Sunday, the 29th of March, 2020, by Kelly's uncle, Ronald Peacock. He had been contacted by Robert's mother, who was growing increasingly concerned about the family after being unable to reach them. The elderly woman lived in a self-contained flat in the same house but had heard nothing from upstairs since the previous evening. When her attempts to contact Robert and Kelly went unanswered, she became worried enough to call for help. Ronald Peacock arrived at the house on what should have been a routine welfare check. He had no idea that he was about to discover one of the most horrific crime scenes in recent British history. His decision to climb through an open window into the couple's bedroom was prompted by genuine concern for his niece and her family. What he found would stay with him forever and change the lives of everyone connected to this family. Ronald climbed through an open window into the couple's bedroom, not knowing what he would find inside. The house was eerily quiet, with none of the normal sounds of family life. No children playing, no television, no conversation. The silence itself was ominous, suggesting that something was seriously wrong. As Ronald made his way through the house, he began to discover the full extent of the horror that had unfolded. He later told the inquest about the moment of discovery. "I realized I could see Ava's head on the bed, under the duvet." This simple statement captures the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt everyone involved. The sight of the children, still tucked under their covers as if they were simply sleeping, must have been particularly traumatic. For a moment, Ronald might have hoped they were just asleep, before the horrible reality became clear. The scene was one of unimaginable horror that contradicted everything about what a family home should be. Ronald found 4-year-old Ava and 2-year-old Lexi lying side by side in their bed, still under their covers. The position of their bodies suggested they had been killed in their sleep, never knowing what was happening to them. The innocence of the scene, 2 children who appeared to be sleeping peacefully, made the reality of their violent deaths even more shocking. Moving through the house, Ronald discovered Kelly's body on the floor next to the children's bed. She was face down, and the defensive wound on her arm told the story of her final moments trying to protect herself and possibly her children. Seeing his niece, someone he had known since birth and watched grow into a loving mother, lying dead in her own home would have been devastating. Ronald then discovered Robert's body in the hallway, the shotgun still positioned as if he had just pulled the trigger. The sight of the man who had destroyed this entire family, lying dead with the weapon that had caused so much devastation, must have filled Ronald with a mixture of horror, revulsion, and perhaps relief that he could do no more harm. The family dog, Billy, was also found dead near the bathroom. Even this innocent animal had not been spared from Robert's violence. For Ronald, who was trying to process the deaths of 4 family members, discovering that even the beloved family pet had been killed would have added to the surreal horror of the situation. Ronald immediately called 999, his voice shaking as he tried to explain the scene to emergency operators. The call would have been one of the most difficult emergency calls the operators had ever received. Trying to describe finding 4 bodies, including 2 young children, in what should have been a safe family home would have challenged everyone involved in the emergency response. He later described the physical sensation of touching the bodies. "I could feel the cold on the back of my head. Kelly was cold, Ava was cold, and Lexi too was cold." This detail captures the reality that the family had been dead for hours, probably since the previous evening. The coldness of their bodies would have confirmed that there was no hope of resuscitation, no chance that medical intervention could save them. Police arrived at approximately 6:45 p.m. on that Sunday evening, responding to what they initially thought might be a welfare check, but quickly realized was a major crime scene. The first officers on the scene would have been confronted with evidence of violence that was shocking even by police standards. Discovering the bodies of 2 young children, their mother and their father, in what was clearly a murder-suicide, would have been traumatic for even experienced officers. Chief Superintendent Jerry Westerman of Sussex Police quickly took control of the scene and the investigation. Within hours, he was able to determine that this was an isolated incident contained within one property. The evidence clearly pointed to Robert as the perpetrator, with no signs of forced entry or involvement by outside parties. Westerman announced publicly that they were not seeking anyone else in connection with the deaths, indicating that police believed it was a murder-suicide from the very beginning. This quick determination was important for public safety and community reassurance. In the early days of lockdown, when people were already anxious and isolated, news of a mass killing could have caused widespread panic. By quickly establishing that this was a domestic incident with no ongoing threat to the public, police helped prevent additional fear in an already frightened community. The investigation team, led by Detective Chief Inspector Charlotte Rimmer and Detective Constable Alice Barr, began the painstaking process of piecing together what had happened. They had to process a scene that contained the bodies of 3 innocent victims, including 2 very young children, along with the perpetrator and even the family pet. Each body had to be photographed, examined, and removed with the dignity and care appropriate to victims of violent crime. The crime scene investigation would take days to complete. Every room in the house had to be searched for evidence. The positioning of bodies, the pattern of blood spatter, the location of spent cartridges, and countless other details had to be documented to build a complete picture of what had happened. For the investigators, dealing with the deaths of young children would have made this work particularly difficult. The timing of the discovery could not have been worse for the nation's morale. Britain was just 6 days into its first lockdown, with people already struggling with isolation, job losses, and fear about the pandemic. The news that a father had killed his entire family during lockdown sent shockwaves through communities already on edge. People who were trapped in their homes with their own families suddenly had to confront the terrifying possibility that home might not be the safe haven they had assumed it to be. The story broke in national media within hours of the bodies being discovered. Headlines across the country reported the horrific details of a family destroyed by domestic violence at the worst possible time. For a nation already grappling with unprecedented challenges, the murder of 2 innocent children by their own father represented a new low in an already dark period. Local residents in Woodmancote were stunned by the news. This was a village where serious crime was virtually unknown, where children played safely in the streets and neighbors looked out for each other. The idea that such extreme violence had occurred in their peaceful community was almost impossible to accept. Many residents had known the family by sight, had seen Robert working on his house extension, had watched Kelly walking with the children. The normalcy of these memories made the reality of their violent deaths even harder to process. Some neighbors admitted they had found Robert difficult to deal with. The neighbor who had called him a bully and complained about his behavior suddenly found their observations taking on a much more sinister significance. What had seemed like ordinary neighborhood friction now looked like warning signs that had been missed. The guilt and second-guessing that followed would affect the community for years to come. The discovery also had a devastating impact on both families involved. Kelly's family was completely unprepared for the news that their beloved daughter and sister was dead, along with her 2 precious children. Emma, Kelly's identical twin, received the phone call that would shatter her world forever. The woman who had spoken to Kelly every single day, who had considered her sister her other half, suddenly found herself without the person closest to her in the world. Emma's grief was compounded by the shocking realization that she had known nothing about the danger Kelly was facing. All those daily phone calls, all that closeness, and yet Kelly had never hinted that she was afraid for her life or the lives of her children. The twin who thought she knew everything about Kelly's life discovered there had been a whole hidden world of fear and abuse that Kelly had never shared. Robert's family was equally shocked, though their grief was complicated by the knowledge that their loved one had been the perpetrator rather than a victim. Despite his mental health struggles and drug problems, they had seen him as a devoted father who adored his children. The idea that he could kill Ava and Lexi, whom he seemed to love so much, was incomprehensible to them. They had to grapple with the dual loss of Robert and the complete destruction of their understanding of who he was. Robert's mother, who had been living in the same house, was particularly traumatized. She had been just downstairs when the murders occurred, unaware that her son was destroying his entire family just feet away. The guilt and horror of that realization would stay with her forever. She had called for help when she became worried about the family's silence, but it was already far too late. The extended family members who had participated in that final FaceTime call were haunted by the memory of what they now knew were Robert and Kelly's last hours alive. The children they had seen playing happily on screen were dead within hours. The normalcy of that video call, with Robert appearing calm and engaged, made the subsequent violence seem even more shocking and inexplicable. Both families released statements calling Kelly the heart of the family and expressing their love for Ava and Lexi. They described what had happened as a diabolical tragedy and struggled to find words adequate to express their grief and shock. The statements revealed the depth of love that surrounded this family and made their violent deaths even more heartbreaking. Emergency responders who attended the scene were offered counseling and support to help them cope with what they had witnessed. Discovering the bodies of young children in their own home is traumatic, even for professionals trained to deal with violent crime. The paramedics, police officers, and crime scene investigators who worked on the case would carry the memory of what they saw for the rest of their careers. The local community organized vigils and memorial services for Kelly, Ava, and Lexi. Flowers, toys, and messages of sympathy appeared outside the house where they had died. The outpouring of grief from people who had never even known the family personally demonstrated how deeply the murders had affected the wider community. In a time when people couldn't gather to mourn collectively due to lockdown restrictions, these spontaneous memorials became crucial outlets for collective grief. The Needham family murders had far-reaching consequences that extended well beyond the immediate tragedy. The case exposed serious flaws in Britain's gun licensing system and sparked a campaign for reform that continues to this day. More broadly, it highlighted the deadly consequences when domestic violence escalates unchecked and demonstrated how crisis situations like lockdown can create perfect conditions for family violence to reach its most extreme conclusion. Emma Ambler, Kelly's identical twin, was thrust into a role she never wanted, becoming the public face of gun control advocacy in the UK. Despite her overwhelming grief, she made the conscious decision to speak out about the failures that had allowed Robert to obtain a weapon he should never have been given access to. This decision required incredible courage and strength, as it meant reliving the trauma of her loss over and over again in public settings. Emma's investigation into Robert's gun license application revealed the extent of the system's failures. She obtained copies of the forms Robert had submitted and was certain they were written in his handwriting. The lies were obvious and easily verifiable. He had clearly stated he had no criminal convictions when he had a police caution for theft, and he had denied any mental health problems when he had a documented history of depression and had sought help for work-related stress. Emma became convinced that if Robert had been refused a gun license, her sister and nieces would still be alive today. This belief drove her to establish the Kelly Fitzgibbons Foundation, which aims to provide support for families affected by similar tragedies and to campaign for stricter gun laws that might prevent future deaths. The foundation represents Emma's determination to ensure that her loved ones did not die in vain. The inquest into the deaths, held at Horsham in July 2022, provided official confirmation of what everyone suspected, while revealing even more disturbing details about the system failures that had enabled the tragedy. Coroner Bridget Dolan QC recorded verdicts of unlawful killing for Kelly, Ava, and Lexi, and suicide for Robert. The legal proceedings brought some closure to the family, while highlighting the multiple missed opportunities to prevent the murders. Chief Superintendent Nigel LeCointe of Hampshire Police was forced to admit during the inquest that Robert had lied extensively about his criminal history and mental health problems on his application. The firearms inquiry officer who interviewed Robert during the application process had recommended that he be sent a disclosure warning letter about failing to provide accurate information on future applications. However, this letter was never sent because Robert's case was transferred to Sussex Police when he moved, and the paperwork fell through the cracks between the two forces. Perhaps most damning was the testimony from Chief Inspector Simon Starnes of Sussex and Surrey Police, who confirmed that Robert's applications would not have been approved under the stricter procedures introduced after 2020. The system had learned from its failures, but the lessons came too late to save the Fitzgibbons family. This admission highlighted how preventable the tragedy had been and how simple changes to procedures might have saved 4 lives. The case also highlighted broader issues about domestic violence recognition and reporting that extended far beyond gun control. While it was never definitively established that Kelly was being subjected to ongoing domestic abuse, experts who studied the case pointed to several warning signs that had been missed by everyone around the family. These warning signs created a pattern that, in retrospect, clearly indicated escalating danger. Robert's cocaine addiction was a major red flag that no one in Kelly's family knew about. Substance abuse is strongly correlated with domestic violence, as it can increase aggression while reducing impulse control. The fact that Robert had been using cocaine for years, to the point where it caused visible damage to his nose requiring medical attention, suggests a serious addiction that would have affected his behavior and decision-making abilities. His history of depression and suicidal thoughts should also have raised concerns about his access to firearms. Mental health problems, particularly when combined with substance abuse, dramatically increase the risk of both suicide and violence toward others. The combination of depression, drug addiction, financial stress, and relationship problems created a volatile mix that should have triggered concern from mental health professionals and others who knew about these issues. Kelly's text messages expressing dread about coming home and her suggestion that the couple should take a break revealed the extent of her fear and unhappiness. These messages, discovered only after her death, showed that she was actively trying to leave an abusive situation but was trapped by circumstances, including the lockdown restrictions that made escape more difficult. The controlling and aggressive behavior that neighbors had observed should also have been recognized as potential warning signs. Robert's tendency to complain about others while engaging in disruptive behavior himself, his reputation as a bully, and his intimidating presence all fit patterns associated with domestic abusers. However, without proper training in recognizing these warning signs, neighbors and others who observed concerning behavior had no way to know how serious the situation was becoming. Emma met with government ministers to discuss gun law reform, presenting a series of specific recommendations based on her painful experience with the system's failures. Her proposals included refusing licenses to people found lying on applications, denying licenses to those with mental health issues or recurring episodes of depression, and conducting annual reviews of all gun license holders instead of the current system that only reassesses people at renewal time. She also advocated for increasing licensing fees, which were cheaper than fishing licenses, so that the costs of proper background checks could be covered by applicants rather than being limited by police budgets. This recommendation addressed one of the practical barriers to thorough background checks, the lack of resources to properly investigate each application. Emma's advocacy work brought her into contact with other families affected by gun violence, creating a network of people united by similar tragedies. Through the Kelly Fitzgibbons Foundation, she began providing practical support for families dealing with the aftermath of domestic homicides. This support includes help navigating the complex legal and administrative challenges that follow such events, as well as emotional support from others who have experienced similar losses. The Foundation's work revealed that many families affected by domestic homicides face similar challenges in dealing with crime scenes, inquests, media attention, and ongoing legal proceedings. These practical difficulties can be overwhelming for people already dealing with devastating grief. By providing guidance and support, the Foundation helps families focus on healing rather than getting lost in bureaucracy. The murders occurred during a period when domestic violence rates were already climbing due to lockdown restrictions, making the case particularly significant for researchers studying the impact of COVID-19 on family violence. Multiple studies showed that domestic homicide rates were 3 times higher than usual during the early weeks of lockdown, with twice as many women killed by men compared to pre-pandemic levels. The Needham case became a tragic symbol of how the pandemic had created perfect conditions for domestic violence to escalate to its deadliest conclusion. The lockdown restrictions that were meant to protect public health had the unintended consequence of trapping victims with their abusers, while simultaneously cutting them off from support networks that might have provided help or escape. Roots. Kelly's situation exemplified this problem. Too was already considering leaving Robert when lockdown began, but suddenly found herself confined with him 24 hours a day, with limited opportunities to seek help or make escape plans. The case was later featured in ITV's Murder in the Family documentary series, which used intimate family footage and exclusive interviews to tell the story of what happened. The program revealed previously unknown details about the family's final hours and Robert's state of mind leading up to the murders. Viewers across the country were left in tears by the tragic story of a family destroyed by one man's actions. The documentary provided a platform for Emma to continue her advocacy work, reaching a wider audience with her message about gun control reform and domestic violence awareness. She spoke candidly about her relationship with Kelly and the devastation of losing not just her sister, but also her 2 beloved nieces. The program helped humanize the victims, showing them as real people with hopes, dreams, and bright futures that were suddenly cut short. For the community of Woodmancote, the murders left lasting scars that are still visible today. The quiet village, where children had played safely in the streets and neighbors knew each other by name, would forever be associated with this horrific crime. Property values in the immediate area were affected, and some residents chose to move away rather than live with the memories of what had happened. The house where the murders occurred became a constant reminder of the tragedy for those who remained in the village. Some neighbors reported feeling uncomfortable walking past the property, while others struggled with guilt about not recognizing the warning signs or doing more to help. The sense of safety and community trust that had characterized the village was permanently damaged. The case also had implications for how domestic violence is identified and addressed, particularly during times of crisis like a pandemic lockdown. It highlighted the importance of maintaining support networks and ensuring that vulnerable people have ways to seek help even when normal services are disrupted. Mental health services, domestic violence, charities, and emergency services all had to adapt their operations to continue serving people in need during lockdown restrictions. Years later, the full impact of Robert's actions continues to reverberate through ripple effects that touch everyone who knew the family. Emma continues her advocacy work, meeting with politicians and campaigning for the reforms that might prevent similar tragedies. She has become an expert on gun licensing failures and domestic violence warning signs, knowledge she gained through the most painful experience imaginable. Emma's courage in speaking publicly about her family's experience has helped other survivors find their voice and seek the changes needed to prevent similar tragedies. Her work has contributed to ongoing policy discussions about gun control, domestic violence prevention, and crisis support systems. She regularly speaks at conferences and meetings with government officials, always carrying photos of Kelly, Ava, and Lexi to remind people that behind every policy discussion are real families whose lives have been destroyed. The Kelly Fitzgibbons Foundation has helped dozens of other families navigate similar tragedies, providing both practical support and emotional guidance during the darkest periods of their lives. Emma has learned to channel her grief into action, determined to ensure that her sister and nieces did not die in vain. The foundation has become a lifeline for families who suddenly find themselves thrust into the nightmare world of domestic homicide survivors. The case prompted broader discussions about how society identifies and helps people in crisis before they reach the point of extreme violence. Robert's mental health struggles, drug addiction, and financial problems were all risk factors that, in combination, created a perfect storm for violence. Yet the various systems that might have intervened, healthcare, social services, law enforcement, MAO, all failed to recognize the danger he posed or coordinate their responses effectively. This failure of joined-up thinking is something Emma has focused on, particularly in her advocacy work. She argues that if Robert's GP records, police records, and gun licensing applications had been properly cross-referenced, the pattern of lies and concerning behavior would have been obvious. Instead, information was siloed across different organizations, preventing anyone from seeing the full picture of risk. The financial pressures facing the family also played a significant role in the lead-up to the murders. The combination of existing debts, the costs of property development, and sudden uncertainty about rental income due to the pandemic created additional stress that contributed to the volatile situation. Emma has advocated for better financial support systems for families in crisis, arguing that money problems alone should never lead to violence, but can be a contributing factor when combined with other issues. The case highlighted the particular vulnerability of children in domestic violence situations. Ava and Lexi had no voice in the adult problems that ultimately cost them their lives. They were completely dependent on the adults around them for protection, yet the very person who should have protected them became their killer. This aspect of the case has been particularly difficult for investigators, family members, and the wider community to come to terms with. The murders also exposed gaps in how domestic violence is understood and identified in contemporary society. Kelly never disclosed abuse to anyone, not even her identical twin sister with whom she spoke every day. This silence is common among domestic violence victims, but makes it extremely difficult for friends, family, and professionals to identify those at risk and offer appropriate support. Experts who analyzed the case pointed to several warning signs that might have been recognized with better awareness and training. Kelly's text messages expressing dread about coming home, Robert's controlling behavior, his drug addiction, his mental health history, and his access to weapons all represented red flags that, taken together, should have triggered serious concern about the safety of the family. The case became a powerful argument for better training of professionals who might encounter domestic violence victims, including healthcare workers, teachers, legal professionals, and police officers. If any of these professionals had been equipped to recognize the warning signs and create opportunities for Kelly to disclose abuse safely, the outcome might have been different. The timing of the murders, coming so early in the pandemic lockdown, also made them particularly significant for researchers studying the impact of COVID-19 on domestic violence rates. The case became part of a growing body of evidence showing that lockdown conditions created increased risk for domestic violence victims, while simultaneously making it harder for them to seek help or escape dangerous situations. The Needham murders occurred just as domestic violence services were scrambling to adapt to lockdown conditions. Shelters had to reduce capacity due to social distancing requirements, court hearings were delayed or moved online, and many support services had to quickly transition to remote operations. For someone like Kelly, who might have been considering leaving an abusive relationship, these disruptions could have made seeking help seem impossible. The case also had implications for how gun licenses are reviewed and monitored during times of crisis or significant life changes. Robert's existing mental health problems and drug addiction, combined with the additional stress of the pandemic and relationship breakdown, should have triggered a review of his suitability to own firearms. Instead, his license remained valid until he used the weapon to kill his family. Emma's campaign has called for automatic reviews of gun licenses when holders experience significant life changes, such as relationship breakdowns, job losses, mental health crises, or other major stressors. She argues that the current system only assesses people at the time of initial application and renewal, missing crucial changes in circumstances that might affect their suitability to own weapons safely. The murders had a particularly profound impact on other parents of young children who saw their own families reflected in the victims. The idea that a father could kill his own children challenged fundamental assumptions about family safety and parental protection. Support groups reported increased anxiety among parents, particularly mothers, who worried about how well they really knew their partners and whether their own families could be at risk. The case also prompted difficult discussions about the responsibility of extended family members and friends to intervene when they noticed concerning behavior. Several people who knew Robert had observed troubling signs: his drug use, his controlling behavior, his financial problems, and his intimidating presence in the neighborhood, but no one had connected these issues or realized the potential danger they represented when combined. This highlights one of the most challenging aspects of domestic violence prevention: the fact that abuse often escalates gradually, with individual incidents seeming manageable or explainable until they culminate in extreme violence. By the time the danger becomes obvious, it may be too late to prevent tragedy. The Needham case demonstrates how multiple warning signs can be present without anyone recognizing the overall pattern of escalating risk. The case serves as a reminder that domestic violence can affect any family, regardless of social class, education, or outward appearances. Kelly and Robert seemed like an ordinary family dealing with ordinary problems until the day those problems combined with Robert's underlying issues to produce extraordinary violence. The seeming normalcy of their life, right up until the final hours, makes their story even more chilling and demonstrates how well abusers can hide their true nature. The murders also highlight the particular dangers posed by firearms in domestic violence situations. Research consistently shows that access to guns dramatically increases the risk of domestic homicides, turning what might have been non-fatal violence into deadly attacks. Robert's legal ownership of a shotgun transformed his ability to harm his family, enabling him to kill multiple people quickly and efficiently before anyone could intervene or escape. Years after the murders, the impact continues to spread through ripple effects that touch everyone who knew the family. Friends and colleagues of Kelly's still struggle with grief and guilt, wondering if they could have done something differently to save her and the children. Teachers and classmates of Ava's remember a bright, cheerful child whose life was cut tragically short. Even professionals involved in the case, police officers, paramedics, court officials, carry the memory of what they saw and the knowledge of how preventable it might have been. The case has become a teaching tool for professionals working in domestic violence prevention, gun licensing, and crisis intervention. It demonstrates how warning signs can be missed, how systems can fail to communicate effectively, and how ordinary people can find themselves in extraordinary danger without anyone around them realizing the severity of the situation. Most importantly, it shows how tragedy can be transformed into advocacy that might prevent future deaths. Emma's courage in speaking publicly about her family's experience has helped other survivors find their voice and push for the changes needed to protect other families. Her work with the Kelly Fitzgibbons Foundation has created a support network for families affected by similar tragedies, providing both practical assistance and emotional support during the darkest periods of their lives. Today, the quiet village of Woodmancote continues to remember the family that was lost in those terrible March days of 2020. Their story serves as both a warning about the dangers that can lurk within seemingly normal families and an inspiration for the advocacy work that continues in their memory. Through Emma's determined efforts to reform gun laws and support other families, Kelly, Ava, and Lexi's legacy lives on in the lives that might be saved by the changes their deaths have inspired. The case reminds us that behind every crime statistic are real people with names, faces, and stories. Kelly Fitzgibbons was a devoted mother and sister who dreamed of giving her children the best possible life. 4-year-old Ava was a bright, loving child who adored her father and had her whole future ahead of her. 2-year-old Lexi was a cheeky, energetic toddler with distinctive curly hair and a personality that brought joy to everyone who knew her. Their deaths were not inevitable. They resulted from a series of failures and missed opportunities that, with different choices and better systems, might have been prevented. Understanding these contributing factors and working to address them is essential for preventing similar tragedies in the future. The Needham family murders stand as a stark reminder of how quickly domestic situations can escalate to deadly violence, how systems designed to protect people can fail catastrophically, and how the consequences of those failures can destroy entire families in a matter of minutes. But they also demonstrate the power of survivors to transform their grief into advocacy that might save other lives, and the importance of never giving up the fight to create a safer world for all families. Summary. On the 29th of March 2020, during the first week of UK's COVID-19 lockdown, Robert Needham, 42, shot and killed his partner Kelly Fitzgibbons, 40, their 2 daughters, Ava, 4, and Lexi, 2, and the family dog before turning the gun on himself at their home in Woodmancote, West Sussex. The family appeared normal to outsiders, but Robert had a hidden cocaine addiction, history of depression, and the couple had £30,000 in debt plus relationship problems. Kelly had been considering leaving him based on text messages found later. Robert had legally purchased the shotgun just 9 days before the murders, despite having lied on his gun license application about his criminal history and mental health issues. The gun licensing system failed catastrophically. Both Hampshire and Sussex police missed obvious red flags. The bodies were discovered by Kelly's uncle Ronald Peacock after Robert's mother couldn't reach the family. The case exposed serious flaws in UK gun licensing and sparked ongoing advocacy by Kelly's twin sister Emma for gun law reform through the Kelly Fitzgibbons Foundation. The murders became symbolic of how lockdown conditions created perfect storms for domestic violence escalation, with families trapped together while support systems were disrupted. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the most twisted family massacre in Tennessee history. On the 29th of July 2025, Austin Robert Drummond shot and killed 4 members of his girlfriend's family in rural Tennessee before abandoning a 7-month-old baby in a stranger's front yard. The victims were James Matthew Wilson, 21, Adriana Williams, 20, Courtney Rose, 38, and 15-year-old Braden Williams. What followed was a week-long manhunt across northwest Tennessee that terrorized multiple communities before Drummond was finally captured. The murders took place in Tiptonville, Tennessee, a small town in Lake County with a population of just over 4,000 people. Located in the northwest corner of Tennessee, near Reelfoot Lake, this is rural America at its most peaceful, a place where families know each other for generations and violent crime is virtually unknown. The victims represented 3 generations of a close-knit family. Courtney Rose, 38, was a corrections officer at Northwest Correctional Complex in Tiptonville. Her daughter Adriana Williams, 20, had recently become a mother to a 7-month-old baby girl. Adriana was in a relationship with James Matthew Wilson, 21, who had embraced his role as a father figure to the baby. The youngest victim was 15-year-old Braden Williams, Adriana's brother and the baby's uncle. Austin Robert Drummond, 28, was not a stranger to this family. He had been dating one of Courtney Rose's sisters, making him part of their extended family circle. But Drummond brought a violent criminal history that the family may not have fully understood. He was a convicted felon with a criminal record stretching back to when he was just 16 years old. In July 2013, as a teenager, Drummond had robbed a Circle K convenience store in Jackson, Tennessee, at gunpoint. For that armed robbery, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. While incarcerated, his behavior only got worse. Prison records show he accumulated 25 disciplinary actions, including charges for refusing orders, drug possession, and possession of a deadly weapon. In 2015, Drummond was convicted of retaliation for past action and sentenced to 3 additional years. He had made threatening statements about the jurors who convicted him and the victim of his original robbery, saying, "They are going to regret it, and I'll be out one day." During his time in prison, Drummond became a confirmed member of the Vice Lords Gang, one of the most violent criminal organizations in the United States. Despite this extensive record of violence, Drummond was released from Northwest Correctional Complex in September 2024 after serving 11 years. The decision to release him was controversial from the beginning. In 2020, the district attorney's office had written a letter opposing his parole, calling him a dangerous felony offender and arguing that he should remain in prison to protect society. On the very day of his release in September 2024, Drummond was arrested on drug charges. More seriously, he was later charged with attempted murder related to an incident that had occurred while he was still in prison. On the 29th of August 2023, Drummond and another defendant had allegedly tried to kill a third inmate. Despite this new attempted murder charge, Drummond was released on bail at DAD, a decision that would prove catastrophic. Build-up. In the weeks leading up to the 29th of July 2025, Drummond later claimed that he had been working as a confidential informant for law enforcement, helping authorities with their crackdown on drug smuggling into jails and prisons. According to Drummond, he had assisted the FBI and other agencies in arresting dealers, corrupt corrections officers, and gang leaders. If true, this work would have put Drummond in extreme danger. Informants who help law enforcement target gang operations are marked for death. Drummond claimed that in the weeks before the murders, he had been notified that his cover was blown and that other gang members had discovered his role as an informant. "I was afraid that because I was an informant, things would go wrong, things would happen to me," Drummond would later tell a reporter from jail. "They found out I was an informant. I was afraid because I knew that bad things happened." Whether this account is true or simply an attempt to justify his actions remains unclear. The pressure of being a known informant in gang circles, combined with his pending attempted murder charges and the constant threat of being returned to prison, may have pushed Drummond to a breaking point. For someone with his history of violence and inability to cope with stress in lawful ways, these pressures created a dangerous situation. The fact that Courtney Rose worked as a corrections officer at the same prison where Drummond had been incarcerated adds another layer of complexity. Whether she knew about his criminal history, whether she had encountered him during his time behind bars, or whether she had opposed his relationship with her sister, are all unknown factors that may have influenced the events. The 29th of July 2025 started as a typical summer day in northwest Tennessee. The heat index would eventually reach 116 degrees, hot enough to be life-threatening for anyone left outside without protection. For the Rose family, it should have been a normal Tuesday. None of them could have known that this would be their last day alive. The exact timeline of events remains unclear, but at some point during the day, Drummond armed himself and made his way to where the family members were located. The choice of weapon, a firearm, indicates premeditation. Drummond had to obtain a gun despite being a convicted felon, which would have required planning and criminal connections. Before we continue with the horrifying details of what happened that day, make sure to subscribe if you're following this breakdown of one of Tennessee's most shocking family massacres. The murders were swift and efficient, suggesting careful planning. The victims were found in a wooded area along Carrington Road in Tiptonville, indicating that either they were killed there or their bodies were moved to that location. The isolated location provided privacy to carry out the attacks without being seen by potential witnesses. All 4 victims were shot to death, showing the calculated nature of the violence. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was an execution. Drummond made the conscious decision to end the lives of 4 people, including a 15-year-old boy who posed no threat to anyone. But perhaps the most puzzling aspect is what happened to the baby. Somehow, Drummond made the decision to spare the 7-month-old child. Not only did he not kill her, but he took her with him and then abandoned her in a location where she would be found alive. The discovery of the abandoned baby at approximately 3 p.m. on the 29th of July 2025 set everything in motion. A witness saw a vehicle drop off the infant in a car seat in the front yard of a residence near Tigrit in Dyer County. With a heat index of 116 degrees, leaving an infant outside could have been fatal within minutes. The witness immediately called 911, potentially saving the baby's life. Emergency responders found the 7-month-old girl alive but at risk of heat stroke. She was immediately transported to a hospital for evaluation. Miraculously, despite being left in deadly heat, she was unharmed and showed no signs of physical abuse. While paramedics treated the baby, investigators began trying to identify her. Within hours, they had identified the baby and learned the names of her parents and family members. The Dyer County Sheriff's Office issued a statement saying they wanted to speak with Courtney Rose, Adriana Williams, and James Matthew Wilson in connection with the abandoned baby. When investigators tried to contact these individuals, they couldn't reach any of them. Phone calls went unanswered. Family members reported they hadn't heard from any of them since earlier that day. What had started as a welfare check quickly escalated into a missing persons investigation. As evening approached, the search for the missing family members intensified. Multiple law enforcement agencies spread out across Lake County, looking for any sign of the 4 missing people. The search led investigators to a wooded area along Carrington Road in Tiptonville, about 40 miles from where the baby had been found. What they discovered there shocked even experienced law enforcement officers. The bodies of all 4 family members were found in the wooded area, each having died from gunshot wounds. The scene showed evidence of execution-style killings rather than a fight or struggle. The isolation of the location and positioning of the bodies indicated this was a planned attack. Courtney Rose, 38, who had spent her career keeping dangerous criminals locked up, had been murdered in the very county where she had dedicated her professional life to public safety. Adriana Williams, 20, would never see her baby daughter grow up. James Wilson, 21, had been killed just as he was building a life with the woman he loved. Braden Williams, just 15 years old, had been murdered before he could pursue his dreams. The crime scene investigation was extensive and complex. The positioning of the bodies and pattern of gunshot wounds told a story of execution-style killings. The victims appeared to have been shot at close range, suggesting they had trusted their killer enough to let him get close. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle, reinforcing the theory that they had been caught completely off guard by someone they trusted. As news of the quadruple homicide spread, the community was gripped with fear and grief. 4 members of a well-known local family had been brutally murdered, and their baby had been found abandoned miles away. Local schools and businesses increased security measures, and many residents changed their daily routines to avoid being out alone. The Bureau of Investigation quickly took over the case, with TBI Director David Rausch personally becoming involved. Within hours of discovering the bodies, investigators had identified Austin Robert Drummond as their primary suspect. His relationship with the Rose family, combined with his criminal history and current legal troubles, made him a logical focus. When authorities tried to locate Drummond for questioning, they discovered he had disappeared. The manhunt for Austin Drummond began immediately, with multiple law enforcement agencies coordinating efforts across Tennessee and surrounding states. The TBI issued a statewide alert describing Drummond as armed and extremely dangerous. Drummond was initially believed to be driving a white 2016 Audi A3. The car was found abandoned in Jackson, Tennessee, about 45 miles from where the baby had been abandoned, suggesting Drummond had changed vehicles. A second vehicle associated with him, a 1988 white Ford pickup truck, was also located, indicating he was taking steps to avoid detection. The search involved local police, sheriff's offices, the TBI, FBI, U.S. Marshals Service, and other federal agencies. Helicopters with thermal imaging scoured rural areas. K-9 units tracked scents from abandoned vehicles. SWAT teams prepared for a potentially violent confrontation. A joint reward of $17,500 was offered for information leading to Drummond's arrest. His photograph and description were distributed widely. The public was warned that he was 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighed 190 pounds, and had brown hair, blue eyes, and a goatee. As the manhunt intensified, authorities began investigating Drummond's associates. This led to arrests of 3 individuals charged with accessory after the fact to first-degree murder. Tanaka Brown, 29, was arrested on August 2 and charged with accessory after the fact and tampering with evidence. Giovanni Thomas, 29, was arrested on August 3 with accessory charges. Ross Sanders, 23, was arrested on August 5, also charged with accessory after the fact. The arrests suggested Drummond had planned his escape and enlisted help from associates. The tampering with evidence charge indicated efforts had been made to destroy or conceal evidence that could have helped investigators. During the manhunt, residents across northwest Tennessee lived in fear. The psychological impact was enormous, as people struggled with knowing a quadruple murderer was loose in their area. Media coverage was extensive, with the story of the abandoned baby who survived while her family was murdered capturing national attention. On Sunday, August 3, Drummond was spotted on surveillance cameras in Jackson, Tennessee, wearing camouflage and carrying a rifle. This sighting led to a shelter-in-place order for nearby residents and intensified the search efforts in that area. The capture of Austin Drummond on the 5th of August 2025 brought relief to terrorized communities but marked the beginning of a complex legal process. The week-long manhunt ended when multiple residents of Jackson spotted Drummond in a wooded area and called police. He was arrested without incident at 9:05 a.m. by 3 Jackson police officers. At the time of arrest, Drummond was found with multiple firearms, though authorities haven't confirmed if these were the murder weapons. His capture in Jackson, where his abandoned vehicle had been found, suggested he'd been hiding in the area for several days. On the 8th of August 2025, Drummond appeared via video conference before Lake County General Sessions Judge Andrew T. Cook for arraignment. Wearing a black and white striped prison uniform and handcuffed, Drummond showed no emotion as charges were read. 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of aggravated kidnapping, 4 counts of felon in possession of a firearm, and 1 count of possession of a firearm during commission of a dangerous felony. District Attorney Danny Goodman announced the state intended to seek the death penalty. Judge Cook entered a not guilty plea on Drummond's behalf and appointed attorney Brian Huffman to represent him. The judge ordered Drummond held without bond, citing the seriousness of charges and danger to the community. In an unexpected development, Drummond spoke publicly for the first time in a recorded jailhouse call with a News Channel 5 reporter. He claimed he'd been working as a confidential informant and that his cover had been blown before the murders. "I was afraid that because I was an informant, things would go wrong," he said, maintaining his innocence while acknowledging he was somehow involved. The case highlighted serious problems with Tennessee's criminal justice system, particularly regarding early release of violent offenders and granting bail to dangerous defendants. Despite prosecutors' 2020 letter warning Drummond was not capable of living among society, he was released and then granted bail on attempted murder charges. The murders had profound impact on the corrections community, given that victim Courtney Rose was a corrections officer at the same prison where Drummond had been incarcerated. This raised concerns about safety of corrections personnel and their families. The case became a rallying point for victims' rights, advocates arguing for stricter limits on bail for violent offenders and longer sentences for repeat criminals. The fact that Drummond was free on bail when he committed the murders demonstrated need for more careful evaluation of release decisions. The 7-month-old survivor became a symbol of hope and resilience. Her survival and the care shown by whoever abandoned her demonstrated that even in darkest moments, human compassion can prevail. The baby was placed with loving family members who would ensure she received proper care. Family members struggled to cope with their losses while dealing with media attention and legal proceedings. James Wilson's mother told reporters the family was trying to let justice take its course and planned to attend Drummond's hearings when possible. The community began the long process of healing from trauma of the murders and manhunt. Memorial services celebrated the victims' lives and positive impacts they'd made. The case prompted discussions about prison reform, bail policies, and monitoring of released offenders. The investigation led to enhanced cooperation between Tennessee law enforcement agencies and federal authorities in tracking violent fugitives. Lessons learned during the manhunt were incorporated into training programs for future cases. As legal proceedings continue, focus remains on seeking justice for the 4 victims. The death penalty case will likely take years to resolve, with extensive pre-trial motions, jury selection, and appeals processes. The complexity means prosecutors must present overwhelming evidence while proving aggravating factors that justify capital punishment. The 3 associates charged with helping Drummond also face significant consequences. Their cases provide leverage for investigators to obtain cooperation in building the case against Drummond by offering reduced sentences in exchange for testimony. The case revealed disturbing details about Drummond's behavior during and after murders. Surveillance footage showed him prepared for violent confrontation with law enforcement. His ability to evade capture for nearly a week demonstrated planning that suggested murders were not impulsive but calculated crimes. The case highlighted ongoing impact of gang culture and prison violence on communities. Drummond's Vice Lords membership had shaped his worldview and provided criminal connections necessary to obtain weapons and assistance. The gang's code of violence may have influenced his decision to kill people he perceived as threats. Years later, the case continues influencing policy discussions about criminal justice reform, bail procedures, and monitoring of released offenders. The failures that allowed Drummond to be free when he committed these murders have been studied by lawmakers and law enforcement seeking to prevent similar tragedies. The 7-month-old survivor has grown up surrounded by family, committed to ensuring she knows about her parents and family members she lost. While she'll never remember the traumatic events, she'll grow up hearing stories about people who loved her and died protecting her future. The case has become a training example for investigators studying family annihilation cases, gang violence, and fugitive apprehension techniques. Families of victims have worked to keep memories alive through memorial scholarships, community service projects, and advocacy for criminal justice reform. The impact extends far beyond Tennessee's borders, serving as a reminder of ongoing challenges communities face in dealing with violent crime and protecting innocent people. The murders stand as testament to both worst and best of human nature, word capacity for inexplicable evil and power of love and community to survive devastating losses. The case remains subject of study for criminologists, law enforcement professionals, and legal experts working to understand how such tragedies can be prevented. The combination of factors, early release of violent offenders, inadequate monitoring, easy access to weapons, and gang influence, represents systemic problems requiring comprehensive solutions. As years pass, the memory of the 29th of July 2025 serves as stark reminder of how quickly lives can be shattered by violence and how important it is for communities to work together protecting their most vulnerable members. The survival of the babies spared in this massacre provides hope that even in darkest moments, there's still possibility for redemption and renewal. But perhaps most importantly, the case serves as powerful reminder that behind every criminal statistic are real people with names, faces, and stories. Courtney Rose was a dedicated public servant. Adriana Williams was a young mother just beginning to build a life. James Wilson was a caring partner who embraced his role as father figure. Braden Williams was a teenager with unlimited potential whose life was cut short. Their deaths were not inevitable. They resulted from series of failures and poor decisions that, with different choices and better systems, might have been prevented. Understanding these failures and working to address them is essential for preventing similar tragedies and honoring the memory of those who were lost. Summary. On the 29th of July 2025, Austin Robert Drummond, 28, shot and killed 4 members of his girlfriend's family in Tiptonville, Tennessee. James Matthew Wilson, 21, Adriana Williams, 20, Courtney Rose, 38, and 5-year-old Braden Williams, then abandoned a 7-month-old baby in a stranger's yard during 116-degree heat. Drummond was dating Rose's sister, making him a trusted family member, but was a convicted felon with armed robbery, history, and Vice Lord's gang member who had been released from prison in September 2024, despite prosecutors calling him dangerous, and was out on bail for attempted murder charges when he committed these murders. All 4 victims were shot execution-style in a wooded area, while the baby was found abandoned 40 miles away but alive and unharmed, sparking a week-long manhunt across northwest Tennessee. Drummond evaded capture for nearly a week, with help from 3 associates who were arrested, before being captured the 5th of August 2025 in Jackson, TN, after citizen tips found with multiple firearms. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, while Drummond claims innocence but admits involvement, and the case exposed failures in the bail system and early release of violent offenders, with the baby survivor placed with loving family members. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to bloodbath in San Diego, the Flint family massacre. On Christmas Eve 2013, Carlo Mercado killed 3 innocent people in a senseless act of violence at Mission Valley Mall in San Diego. The victims were Ilona Flint, 22, and brothers Salvatore and Gianni Belvedere, ages 22 and 24. What started as a simple motorcycle breakdown turned into a random killing spree that destroyed 3 young lives and shattered the peace of the holiday season. This case shows how quickly a normal evening can turn deadly when someone with evil intentions crosses paths with innocent people. Contextual overview. The murders took place at Westfield Mission Valley Mall in San Diego, California, one of the busiest shopping centers in the area. This was December 23rd and 24th, 2013, during the peak of Christmas shopping season. The mall was packed with last-minute shoppers, families picking up final gifts, and workers pulling long shifts to meet holiday demand. It should have been a time of joy and celebration, but instead became the setting for one of San Diego's most shocking crimes. Ilona Flint was a 2-year-old Russian immigrant who had come to America as a teenager full of hopes and dreams. She worked at the Kathy Jean shoe store in Mission Valley Mall, a job that helped support her while she built her new life in California. Ilona was described by friends as an angel, sweet, endearing, and someone who lit up every room she entered. She had moved to San Diego to be with the love of her life, a young man she had met when she was just 15 years old. Ilona had been born in the Soviet Union and came to America with her mother, Inga Flint Jones, seeking better opportunities and freedom. She attended the Walden School of Liberal Arts in Provo, Utah, where she focused on English and loved reading. Those who knew her said life held so much promise for her. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel special and loved. At the Walden School, Ilona met Gianni Belvedere, who would become the love of her life. Gianni was 24 years old, a talented musician who played piano beautifully. He came from a close-knit Italian-American family that valued music, laughter, and spending time together. Gianni was described by his family as sweet, funny, and extremely caring. He was the type of person who really listened when you talked to him and genuinely cared about what you had to say. Gianni had moved to San Diego with his family around 2011, and it wasn't long before Ilona followed him there. Their love story was the kind that people dream about. 2 teenagers who met in high school and stayed devoted to each other as they grew into adults. They had gotten engaged and were planning their future together, looking forward to building a life in California. Salvatore Belvedere, known as Sal to his friends and family, was Gianni's two-year-old younger brother. Like his older brother, Sal was musically talented and played guitar. The two brothers often performed together at their family's Sunday night dinners, filling their home with music and joy. Sal was described as super sweet and really quiet, the kind of person who preferred to let his music do the talking. The Belvedere family was extremely close, and music was central to their lives. The brothers' mother, Grace, would later say that her home had been filled with laughter and loudness when her sons were alive, but after their deaths, it became quiet, with the laughter and loudness replaced by silence and sorrow. The family dinners, where Gianni played piano and Sal played guitar, had been a source of joy and connection that brought everyone together. Carlo Mercado was 28 years old and lived in Mira Mesa, a suburb of San Diego. Unlike the victims, Mercado was not someone living an honest life. He was known to police as a scammer who would purposely get into accidents and then try to fleece other drivers for money. This was how he made his living, through fraud and deception, taking advantage of innocent people for financial gain. But Mercado's criminal activities went beyond simple insurance fraud. On the night of the 23rd of December 2013, he wasn't out working his usual scam. Instead, he was riding his motorcycle near Mission Valley Mall when something went wrong. What should have been a minor inconvenience would trigger a series of events that would destroy multiple families and shock the San Diego community. The evening of the 23rd of December 2013 started normally for everyone involved. Ilona was working her shift at the Kathy Jean shoe store, helping last-minute Christmas shoppers find the perfect gifts. The mall was busy with holiday crowds, and many stores were staying open later than usual to accommodate all the shoppers. For Ilona, it was just another day at work, though she was probably looking forward to finishing her shift and spending time with Gianni. Gianni was planning to pick up Ilona from work, as he always did. Ilona didn't like to drive, so Gianni made it a habit to drive down to the mall and wait for her to finish her shift. It was a sweet gesture that showed how much he cared about her safety and comfort. On this particular night, he was driving his green 2004 Toyota Camry, which still had Utah plates from when the family had lived there. Sal was spending the evening at home, probably practicing guitar or just relaxing. As the younger brother, he looked up to Gianni, and they had a close relationship. The family was preparing for Christmas, looking forward to spending the holiday together with their traditional music-filled celebration. None of them could have known that Carlo Mercado was also in the area that night, riding his motorcycle and about to have a breakdown that would change everything. The paths of these four people were about to cross in the most tragic way possible. As the 23rd of December 2013 turned into the early hours of December 24, the events that would lead to 3 murders began to unfold. Ilona was finishing up her long shift at the Kathy Jean shoe store, excited to clock out and meet Gianni in the parking lot. It had been a busy day at the mall with Christmas Eve shoppers, and she was probably tired and ready to go home. At exactly 12:22 a.m. on Christmas Eve, Ilona clocked out of work. The moon was in its waning gibbous phase, hanging like a chunky crescent in the night sky as she made her way through the mall toward the parking lot where Gianni was waiting for her. She had no idea that her fiancé was already in terrible danger. Earlier that evening, Carlo Mercado had been riding his motorcycle near the Mission Valley Mall when it broke down. This mechanical failure left him stranded and frustrated, looking for a way to get home or get his bike fixed. Instead of calling for legitimate help or finding an honest solution to his problem, Mercado saw an opportunity to take what he wanted from someone else. Gianni had arrived at the mall early and was sitting in his green Toyota Camry in the parking lot, waiting for Ilona to finish work. He was probably scrolling through his phone or listening to music, just passing time until his fiancée was ready to leave. The parking lot outside Macy's department store was dimly lit, providing cover for what was about to happen. Around 11:30 p.m. on December 23, Mercado approached Gianni's car on foot. Gianni was on the phone with his cousin, having a normal conversation, when this stranger appeared at his window. What exactly was said between them remains unclear, but prosecutors believe Mercado either tried to carjack Gianni's vehicle or got into some kind of road rage argument with him. What is known is that Gianni was still on the phone with his cousin when the conversation suddenly ended at 11:45 p.m. His phone shut off completely and never came back on. This abrupt end to the call would later become a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation, as it marked the exact time when Gianni's life was cut short. Mercado shot Gianni as he sat in his car, killing him instantly. The young man who had driven to the mall to pick up his fiancée, just as he had done countless times before, was dead before he could even understand what was happening. Mercado then pushed Gianni's body over to the passenger seat and got behind the wheel of the stolen Toyota. With Gianni's body bleeding in the passenger seat, Mercado drove the car away from the mall toward his home in Mira Mesa. He stopped at a gas station along the way and filled up the tank with gas, not caring that there was a dead body just feet away from him. His DNA would later be found on the gas cap, providing investigators with crucial evidence linking him to the crime. After reaching the Mira Mesa area, Mercado made a decision that shows just how cold and calculating he was. He moved Gianni's body from the passenger seat to the trunk of the car, where it would be hidden from view. He then drove back toward Mission Valley Mall, probably planning to retrieve his broken-down motorcycle and remove evidence that could connect him to Gianni's murder. But Mercado had no idea that his return to the mall would lead to 2 more murders. He didn't know that Sal and Ilona would be in the parking lot, frantically searching for Gianni and wondering why he hadn't shown up to pick up Ilona as promised. The stage was set for an encounter that would turn a single murder into a triple homicide. Before we continue with the horrifying details of what happened next, make sure to subscribe if you're following this breakdown of one of San Diego's most shocking Christmas Eve crimes. Meanwhile, back at the mall, Ilona had finished closing the store and was ready to meet Gianni in the parking lot. When she got outside and didn't see him waiting for her, she probably felt confused and maybe a little worried. Gianni was reliable and always picked her up on time. When he didn't answer his phone, her concern would have grown. Ilona called Sal, Gianni's younger brother, to ask if he knew where Gianni was. Sal had no idea his brother was already dead, but he could hear the worry in Ilona's voice and offered to come pick her up from the mall. It was a kind gesture from a caring brother-in-law who wanted to help his future sister-in-law get home safely. Sal drove to Mission Valley Mall and found Ilona waiting in the parking lot. Together, they sat in his car and tried to figure out what had happened to Gianni. They called local hospitals, thinking maybe he had been in an accident. They called the jail, wondering if he had been arrested for some reason. They even called other family members and friends, hoping someone had heard from him. For over an hour, from midnight to 1 a.m., Sal and Ilona sat in that parking lot, making phone calls and growing more worried by the minute. They had no way of knowing that Gianni was already dead, his body hidden in the trunk of his own car just miles away. They were simply 2 people who loved Gianni, trying to find him and make sure he was safe. At around 1:15 a.m., their worst nightmare came true, though not in the way they could have ever imagined. As they sat in the parking lot near Macy's department store, still trying to reach Gianni by phone, they saw his green Toyota Camry pulling into the parking lot. For a moment, they probably felt relief, thinking Gianni had finally arrived and everything was okay. But as the car got closer, they realized something was wrong. The person behind the wheel wasn't Gianni. It was a stranger, Carlo Mercado, who was driving their loved one's car. Ilona's instincts immediately told her they were in danger. She quickly dialed 911, telling the operator that she was at Mission Valley Mall and that something was very wrong. At approximately 1:15 a.m. on Christmas Eve 2013, Carlo Mercado pulled into the Mission Valley Mall parking lot, driving Gianni Belvedere's green Toyota Camry. In the trunk of that car was Gianni's dead body, but Sal and Ilona had no way of knowing that their loved one had already been murdered. They only knew that a stranger was driving his car, and that could only mean something terrible had happened. Ilona's quick thinking probably saved lives beyond her own, even though it couldn't save her. The moment she realized the wrong person was driving Gianni's car, she called 911. Her call to emergency services would provide investigators with crucial evidence about the timing and nature of the attack. She told the dispatcher she was at Mission Valley Mall and that she believed she was in danger. Mercado saw Sal and Ilona in the parking lot and realized they had spotted him in Gianni's stolen car. Rather than trying to flee or come up with an explanation, he made the decision to eliminate these witnesses to his crime. He was carrying a .22 caliber handgun equipped with a homemade silencer, which explained why no gunshots were clearly heard during Ilona's 911 call. What happened next was a cold-blooded execution of 2 innocent people who had done nothing wrong except love someone that Mercado had already killed. Mercado got out of Gianni's car and approached Sal and Ilona's vehicle with his weapon drawn. He shot Ilona first, hitting her in the back and then in the head. Even as she was wounded and dying, she managed to stay on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, though she was unable to speak clearly. Sal was shot in the head and torso, suffering multiple gunshot wounds that would prove fatal. The young man who had come to the mall simply to help his future sister-in-law get home safely was now dying in a parking lot on Christmas Eve. Mercado shot him right between the eyes, showing the close range and personal nature of the attack. The silencer on Mercado's gun muffled the sounds of the shots, which is why other people in the area didn't immediately realize what was happening. The 911 call from Ilona captured the sound of the attack, but the shots weren't loud enough to alert other people in the parking lot or nearby businesses. After shooting both victims, Mercado got back into Gianni's Toyota and drove away from the scene, leaving Sal and Ilona bleeding and dying in their car. Ilona was already dead from her head wound, but Sal was still alive, though critically injured. The entire attack had lasted only minutes, but it had destroyed 2 more young lives and left families devastated. A mall employee who had witnessed part of the attack called 911 just 3 minutes after Ilona's call. This witness told police they had seen a man of average height standing outside the driver's window of the victim's car before getting into a vehicle that matched the description of Gianni's Toyota and driving away. This witness account would become crucial in helping investigators understand what had happened. Police and paramedics arrived at the scene to find both victims suffering from gunshot wounds. Ilona was pronounced dead at the scene, having died from her head wound. Sal was rushed to a nearby hospital in critical condition, fighting for his life. The parking lot was immediately secured as a crime scene, and investigators began the process of trying to understand what had happened. Sal fought for his life in the hospital for 3 days, but his injuries were too severe. On the 27th of December 2013, 3 days after the shooting, he died from his wounds. The young man who played guitar and brought music to his family's Sunday dinners was gone, leaving behind parents and siblings who couldn't understand how their world had been shattered so suddenly. The crime scene investigation revealed evidence of a brutal and senseless attack. Blood evidence showed where the victims had been shot, and ballistics experts began analyzing bullet fragments to try to determine what type of weapon had been used. The positioning of the bodies and the nature of the wounds told the story of people who had been caught completely off guard by a violent stranger. Meanwhile, Mercado had driven away from the mall in Gianni's car, with the dead man's body still in the trunk. But he wasn't finished with his criminal activities for the night. After leaving the scene of the double shooting, he drove back to the area where he had left his broken-down motorcycle. He was determined to remove this evidence that could connect him to the crimes. Mercado rented a U-Haul truck with a trailer and returned to the mall area to collect his motorcycle. He loaded the bike onto the trailer, thinking he was covering his tracks. But during the drive home, the motorcycle fell off the back of the truck, and Mercado actually filed an insurance claim online, saying he had been in an accident. This fraudulent claim would later become part of the evidence against him. For the next 3 weeks, Mercado kept Gianni's body in the trunk of the stolen Toyota while he went about his daily life. To mask the smell of decomposition, he placed cans of air freshener and boxes of baking soda in the trunk. He even continued working at his job at Target, where he bought Febreze air freshener to help cover up the stench of the dead body he was carrying around. The fact that Mercado was able to function normally while driving around with a corpse in his trunk shows the level of his callousness and lack of human feeling. He went to work, interacted with coworkers and customers, and went about his routine as if nothing had happened, all while Gianni's body decomposed just feet away from him. At one point during those 3 weeks, Mercado even tried to sell Gianni's car, apparently not caring that it contained evidence of his crimes. The attempt to profit from his victim's property while the victim's body was still in the trunk demonstrates the complete lack of conscience that drove Mercado's actions. On the 17th of January 2014, almost a month after the murders, Mercado finally decided to dispose of Gianni's body. He drove the Toyota to Riverside, California, about 90 miles away from San Diego, and abandoned it in the parking lot of a shopping center. He left the car there with Gianni's decomposed remains still in the trunk, then found another way to get back to San Diego. Later that same day, people in the Riverside shopping center began noticing a horrible smell coming from the abandoned green Toyota. Someone called police to report the odor, and when officers arrived to investigate, they discovered Gianni's badly decomposed body in the trunk. The young man who had been reported missing for nearly a month was finally found, but in the most tragic circumstances possible. The discovery of Gianni's body in Riverside on the 17th of January 2014 transformed what had been a double homicide investigation into a triple murder case. San Diego police had been investigating the Christmas Eve shootings of Sal and Ilona, while also treating Gianni as a missing person. Finding his decomposed remains in the trunk of his own car 90 miles away revealed the true scope of the crime. The body was so badly decomposed after 3 weeks that identification had to be made through dental records. The condition of the remains was horrific, showing the complete disregard Mercado had for human life and dignity. Along with the body, investigators found evidence that someone had tried to mask the smell: cans of air freshener with taped-down triggers and boxes of baking soda. The forensic examination revealed that Gianni had been shot behind the left ear, as if someone had been standing over him and to the side when they pulled the trigger. A bullet was recovered from his skull, which would later be matched to the same .22 caliber weapon used to kill Sal and Ilona. This ballistics evidence would prove crucial in connecting all three murders to the same killer. Blood evidence was found on the passenger seat of the Toyota, showing where Gianni had initially been shot and had bled out before his body was moved to the trunk. The amount of blood and its location confirmed that he had died in the car, probably within minutes of being shot. For nearly 6 months after the murders, San Diego police had no real leads in the case. The randomness of the crimes made them extremely difficult to solve. There was no apparent connection between the victims and their killer, no obvious motive, and no witnesses who could identify the suspect. The case seemed like it might remain unsolved indefinitely. The victims' families were devastated not only by their losses but also by the lack of progress in the investigation. Christmas would forever be ruined for them, as it would always be associated with the brutal murders of their loved ones. The Belvedere family had lost 2 sons in one night, while Ilona's mother had lost her daughter, just as she was beginning to build her life in America. Grace Belvedere, the mother of Gianni and Sal, was particularly heartbroken by the silence that now filled her home. The Sunday night family dinners, where her sons had played piano and guitar, were no more. The laughter and music that had characterized their family gatherings had been replaced by grief and an emptiness that could never be filled. Ilona's mother, Inga Flint Jones, struggled with the knowledge that her daughter had come to America seeking a better life, only to have it cut short by senseless violence. Ilona had survived leaving the Soviet Union and adapting to a new country, only to be killed by a stranger in a mall parking lot. The cruel irony of her death wasn't lost on anyone who knew her story. The investigation continued with detectives following every possible lead, but the random nature of the crimes made them extremely difficult to solve. Without witnesses who could identify the killer or clear evidence pointing to a suspect, investigators had to rely on forensic evidence and hope for a break in the case. That break came on the 18th of January 2014, just one day after Gianni's body was discovered in Riverside. Carlo Mercado was stopped at a Border Patrol checkpoint in San Clemente, California, when an agent noticed a weapons case in the backseat of his vehicle. This routine stop would finally provide the breakthrough that investigators needed. When agents searched Mercado's car, they found an assault rifle, 2 handguns, and a homemade silencer. One of the handguns was a .22 caliber weapon that would later be matched through ballistics testing to the bullets that killed all 3 victims. Mercado was arrested on weapons charges, but investigators didn't immediately realize they had caught the triple murderer they had been seeking. The connection between Mercado and the murders came through DNA evidence. His DNA was found on the gas cap of Gianni's car, linking him to the stolen vehicle. More DNA evidence was found on the air freshener cans that had been used to mask the smell of Gianni's decomposing body. This forensic evidence provided the proof investigators needed to charge Mercado with the murders. Phone records also placed Mercado in the area of Mission Valley Mall at the time of the crimes. His cell phone had pinged towers near the mall during the time frame when the murders occurred, providing additional evidence of his presence at the scene. On the 21st of June 2014, nearly 6 months after the murders, San Diego police announced that they had arrested Carlo Mercado in connection with the triple homicide. The arrest brought some relief to the victims' families, who had been waiting for justice while struggling with their grief. Mercado initially pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. His attorney claimed that his client adamantly denied any involvement in the killings and promised to prove his innocence. But the physical evidence against Mercado was overwhelming, and it became clear that he would have difficulty mounting a successful defense. The case took an unusual turn when Mercado was found mentally incompetent to stand trial. 2 psychiatrists and 1 psychologist diagnosed him as schizophrenic, psychotic, and suffering from catatonic depression. In November 2014, a judge ruled that Mercado could not assist in his own defense and ordered him to be treated at Patton State Hospital for up to 3 years. This mental health issue delayed the trial and added another layer of complexity to an already tragic case. The victims' families had to wait even longer for resolution, watching as the legal system dealt with questions about Mercado's mental state and fitness for trial. After more than a year of treatment at Patton State Hospital, Carlo Mercado was deemed competent to stand trial in December 2015. A judge ruled that criminal proceedings against him could resume, finally allowing the case to move forward toward resolution. The families of the victims had waited 2 years for this moment, and they were ready to see justice served. In February 2016, Mercado pleaded not guilty to the murders, setting the stage for what promised to be a lengthy and emotionally difficult trial. Prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty, given the heinous nature of the crimes and the fact that 3 innocent people had been killed in cold blood. The death penalty decision reflected the prosecutors' belief that Mercado's crimes were among the most serious that could be committed. The random nature of the killings, the use of a silencer to muffle the gunshots, and the complete lack of remorse shown by the defendant all supported the decision to seek capital punishment. But in January 2017, just 3 months before his trial was scheduled to begin, Mercado made a surprising decision. He changed his plea to guilty, admitting to all 3 murders and accepting responsibility for the deaths of Gianni Belvedere, Salvatore Belvedere, and Ilona Flint. The guilty plea came as a shock to many observers who had expected the case to go to trial. Mercado's decision to admit his guilt meant that the victims' families would be spared the trauma of a lengthy trial, but it also meant they would never get full answers about why their loved ones had been killed. On the 12th of January 2017, Judge Frederick Link sentenced Mercado to 3 consecutive terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge told Mercado, "Sir, you will never get out of prison," making it clear that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars for his crimes. During the sentencing hearing, Mercado showed no emotion as the judge handed down the sentence. He stared blankly ahead, appearing completely unmoved by the gravity of what he had done or the pain he had caused. When given an opportunity to address the families of his victims, Mercado glanced at his lawyers and simply said, "No," refusing to offer any apology or explanation for his actions. The families of the victims attended the sentencing hearing, bringing photographs of their loved ones to court. The judge ordered Mercado to look at the pictures, forcing him to confront the humanity of the people he had killed. But even this gesture seemed to have no impact on the convicted killer, who showed no signs of remorse or recognition of the lives he had destroyed. Antoinette Belvedere, the sister of Gianni and Sal, read a letter in court on behalf of her mother Grace. The letter spoke of how their families' lives had been forever changed by the murders. She described how their home had once been filled with music and laughter when her brothers were alive, but now was quiet and filled with sorrow. The letter reminded everyone in the courtroom that behind the legal proceedings were real people who had lost loved ones in the most terrible way possible. The Belvedere family had been robbed of their Sunday night dinners filled with music, their holiday celebrations, and their future memories with 2 young men who had brought joy to everyone around them. Ilona's mother, Inga Flint Jones, also spoke about her daughter's early years in the Soviet Union and her love for Gianni. She talked about how much promise Ilona's life had held, and how excited she had been about building a future in America with the man she loved. That future had been stolen by a stranger's senseless violence. Deputy District Attorney Brian Erickson emphasized during the hearing that the victims had nothing to do with their own deaths. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time when they encountered someone willing to kill for no apparent reason. Gianni, Salvatore, and Ilona had nothing to do with their demise, he said. This could have been any one of us in that parking lot that night. The randomness of the murders was perhaps the most difficult aspect for the community to understand. People could accept that violence sometimes occurs between people who know each other, or as a result of conflicts over money or relationships. But the idea that someone could be killed simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time challenged everyone's sense of safety and security. The case prompted discussions about security at shopping malls and the vulnerability of people going about their daily routines. The families of the victims filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Westfield, the company that owned Mission Valley Mall, claiming that inadequate lighting and security monitoring had contributed to the deaths. The lawsuit alleged that the mall had failed to provide sufficient safety measures to protect patrons in the parking lot where the murders occurred. While the mall company disputed these claims, the case highlighted the challenges that public spaces face in protecting people from random acts of violence. The impact of the murders extended far beyond the immediate families of the victims. Friends who had known Ilona, Gianni, and Sal struggled to cope with the senseless loss of 3 young people who had been full of life and promise. The tight-knit community that had formed around the Walden School of Liberal Arts in Utah was particularly affected, as many people had known all 3 victims. Danny King, who had been best friends with Ilona since they were 13 years old, described going into shock when she heard about the murders. She said it felt like a dream because it couldn't be real. The 2 young women had been connected at the hip whenever Ilona was in town, and losing her best friend to random violence was devastating. The timing of the murders during the Christmas season added an extra layer of pain for everyone affected. Christmas would forever be associated with loss and grief rather than joy and celebration. The holiday season that should have been about giving gifts and spending time with loved ones instead became an annual reminder of lives cut short. For the broader San Diego community, the case served as a wake-up call about the reality of random violence. The idea that 3 young people could be killed simply for being in a mall parking lot on Christmas Eve was deeply unsettling to residents who had always felt relatively safe in their community. The investigation had taken enormous resources and involved multiple law enforcement agencies working together to solve what initially seemed like an unsolvable case. The breakthrough had come only through careful forensic work and a bit of luck when Mercado was stopped at the checkpoint with weapons in his car. The case became a teaching example for law enforcement about the importance of DNA evidence and the value of routine checkpoints in catching criminals. Without the Border Patrol stop that led to Mercado's arrest, he might never have been caught for the murders. The resolution of the case brought some closure to the victims' families, but it could never bring back their loved ones or undo the trauma they had experienced. The guilty plea meant they were spared a lengthy trial, but it also meant they never got full answers about why someone had chosen to destroy their families. The case highlighted the random nature of violent crime and the fact that good people can become victims through no fault of their own. Ilona, Gianni, and Sal had been living normal lives, working, going to school, and building relationships when they encountered someone who saw them as nothing more than obstacles to be eliminated. Today, the case serves as a reminder of how precious life is and how quickly it can be taken away. The 3 young people who died in the Mission Valley Mall parking lot had dreams, plans, and people who loved them. Their deaths represent not just the loss of 3 lives, but the loss of all the contributions they might have made to the world if they had been allowed to live. The families continue to honor the memory of their loved ones through various means, keeping their spirits alive even as they cope with the pain of their absence. The music that Gianni and Sal brought to their family gatherings may be silenced, but their memory lives on in the hearts of those who knew and loved them. On Christmas Eve 2013, Carlo Mercado, 28, killed 3 innocent people at Mission Valley Mall in San Diego. Ilona Flint, 22, and brothers Gianni Belvedere, 24, and Salvatore Belvedere, 22. Mercado's motorcycle broke down near the mall, leading him to approach Gianni, who was waiting to pick up his fiancée Ilona from work, shooting him and stealing his car. About 90 minutes later, Mercado returned to the mall and encountered Sal and Ilona in the parking lot searching for Gianni, shooting both when they spotted him driving Gianni's car. Mercado kept Gianni's body in the car trunk for 3 weeks, using air fresheners to mask the smell before abandoning the vehicle in Riverside. He was caught at a Border Patrol checkpoint in January 2014 with weapons including the murder weapon, and DNA evidence linked him to all 3 killings. After being found mentally incompetent and treated at a psychiatric hospital, Mercado pleaded guilty in January 2017 and received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole, showing no remorse and refusing to apologize to the victims' families. The case shocked San Diego due to its completely random nature. The victims had no connection to their killer and were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time during what should have been a joyful holiday season. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.